Alrighty, bow hunters, welcome back. Very excited for this one. We finally have him back on. Returning guest, Mr. Ayden Doumtsis. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you for having me. Very excited.
It's funny, man. We've talked pretty much ever since we had the first podcast. So you were I think episode 2 or episode 3 on the podcast, and literally have talked since. And I was trying to get you on probably 2 years ago, and then we set a date, and then work got in the way for both of us, and then I think we set a date again at the start of this year, maybe, and then the same thing happened. Just work took over, and we're in December. What are we at? Maybe the 20th? No, 19th. I sent you a message the other day. I'm like, dude, I would love to get a Chital based podcast out for January, knowing that a lot of people hit them in January. What can you do? Is there anything before Christmas possibly? And I was like, of course, like the busiest time of year, but it's funny how we were able to actually make it work. So yeah, appreciate you making the time and effort to do this.
No, no worries at all. It's funny, like looking back, it's like surely I haven't been that busy, but then the last 2 years for me have been a whirlwind with like work up in the Northern Territory doing the vet work. And it's so funny, like I feel like I'm so different to everyone else with like a lot of their normal regimented like 9 to 5s. And like
Hmm.
even when you say most people are busy up until Christmas, like I understand that you are at the moment, but then for me, I've essentially just finished up in the Northern Territory with the vet work and now unemployed, homeless, doing work out of James. I'm down here and I flew down to Tassie to do some twin elements work with James. So I've just been, working flat out on the editing side of things the last few days. So
Yeah.
um, can definitely feel like the pressure of Christmas coming, but also like pretty excited for just sitting down and being able to do more of this sort of stuff, which will be good.
Definitely, man. It's kind of cool to see what you guys are going to be able to do in the next year with you taking it on a bit more full time. And I think the other concept of that is like what you guys have already been doing over the last 3 months at least, and also, well, really the last year, but the last 3 months in particular, some of the more like longer length films you've been putting out. It's pretty incredible to see. I mean, a credit to you guys and how much your skills have developed, right? Like just the stuff you're putting out is really next level. You've really upped the game and the ante in general. But B, just how much you're actually putting out as well. Like I've got so much footage on my camera and I've not touched it because I'm like, where do you find time? Like you really have to make it a
Yeah.
part of your routine, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that's like, I think that's probably the biggest thing over the last like probably year in particular is like James and I, for those that don't know, are full time veterinarians, like day to day. And for me, that was like, especially doing the rural remote cattle work in the Northern Territory, was waking up at 5 most mornings, preg testing cattle all day, and then potentially even driving to another station that night, a couple 100 kilometers to do the next job the next day. And that might go on for 30 days. And then
Wow.
somewhere within that daily like routine or calendar of enforced like work or paid work
Mhm.
you've I would try and fit in obviously like health, fitness, family, relationships, and then on top of all that twin elements like scheduling, posting reels, emails, like all the like podcasts, all this type of stuff. So both James and I have been pretty flat out the last like year or so, especially the last few months as we're sort of wrapping up a lot of the vet work. But what's been really exciting is similar to what you said, like just being able to get stuff out and keep
Mm.
that momentum going. And now look forward to sort of 2025 when we can hopefully do it a lot more like essentially full time or at least part time, where we have like a week where we're both sitting there going, all right, this is what we need to get done and achieved for this. And like, yeah, that's pretty exciting just to keep going with that momentum we've sort of created, um,
Definitely.
which will be good.
Yeah, hats off to you. And I mean, maybe they'll do a quick teaser then. What have you guys got coming out in the coming months? What are the next films that you guys are about to release?
Yeah, so we've got heaps of stuff that's really exciting. We've got, to be honest, we're actually going to launch a podcast in 2025 ourselves,
Yes.
like
Yeah, I've been
which
talking to James a
sort
lot
of,
about it. Yeah.
yeah, we've sort of flirted with a lot, which is just, yeah, that's going to be like a platform to obviously just talk
Mhm.
hunting and outdoors and everything similar to what we're doing now.
Definitely.
And just,
I'm all for it. Yeah. I
yeah,
really think like the more education and the more um good light we can shine on hunting, the better, right? Like it is becoming a forgotten concept unless we start to really highlight it and talk about it more. So I'm like, hey, the more the merrier. Let's get as many podcasts out, as many YouTube videos that are in favor of like the animal, not just showing the shots, but also just actually highlighting what we do as a sport and a lifestyle. It's yeah, it's a very different concept to what most people think, I think.
oh, 100%. And that's where there's so much like education and like wisdom and sharing to be had and share, I
Hmm.
guess, with the greater community, and we get so many like of those frequently asked questions on our Instagrams and things that we'd
Yeah.
love to even create and just have within the episodes and things. So that's going to be really exciting. We're going to get that launched. We've just got all the gear, which I think, thank you again, like James was saying, you're
Yeah, no
instrumental in
sweat.
sort of gear to get. So it obviously speaks to you having your own podcast and then helping out others who are keen to do similar. Like it's massive. So yeah, thank you very much for that. But
You're welcome.
as far as the YouTube video goes, YouTube video, sorry, we have a fallow rut hunt that's coming
Awesome.
out early in the year,
Mm-hmm.
followed by what will probably be like a 5 to 10 part USA vlog styled film. So we obviously had that little, it ended up being a like long cinematic sort of piece, but it was more of like a trailer as to what's to come and what's to be expected, I guess, just
That's
because that
sick.
hunt,
Yeah.
for those that don't know, went for 20 odd days, and each day was like 18 hours of hunting by the time you factored in like up before light, back after dark and stuff. So
What
there's
does
just so much.
what's your camera setup look like for that? Like how many cards are you taking? Because obviously you can't
Oh,
just wipe a card. And
yeah,
then how many
it was,
batteries and stuff? Like what's it look like?
oh, what's it feel like is probably better. It feels like 20 odd kilos of camera gear in your backpack.
Yeah.
Like, I'd love to do a podcast on specifically like that trip, because I went there as a pretty fit, like 80 kilo sort of human, and
Mm-hmm.
left weighing 74
Jesus.
kilos. So I'd
Yeah.
lost 6 kilos of like stuff that I didn't really have much to lose. And I honestly put it down to just like, you're obviously carrying your wet weather gear, your day gear, your
Yeah.
food, all this type of stuff, and then so much camera gear for so long of the day in a caloric deficit. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, honestly, as you said, it's you're carrying all this spare gear, all these like little lens cleaners and things like this that half the time you can't even use because you're just hunting. Like, and that's the thing, we often get people saying, "Oh, like the audio was a bit muffled in that section," and you're like, "Dude, if you're seeing the footage, it means that it was suitable enough to like try and video." Like we're battling like torrential rain, howling wind,
Oh
like
God.
all this stuff. Like some of the time lapses that we do, like people, you see a little time lapse for 2 seconds in like a film, but you don't see that someone was there trying to set it up for 45 minutes in the howling
Uh-huh.
rain with holding an umbrella over the camera. Like there's just so much stuff that
Far
people
out.
sort of take for granted, I guess. But it's what drives us. Like we
Oh,
absolutely
definitely.
love it.
Yeah.
You can probably hear like the passion in my voice when I talk about it, and it's all good memories. Like,
Yeah.
but yeah, like honestly, I can't really do justice into like the camera gear side of things to answer your question. But
How many memory cards do you take? Just answer that.
oh, honestly, like 10 probably.
Yeah,
And
wow.
a lot of them, we're backing it up onto a laptop if we can, within every 5 days. Like, because
Mm-hmm.
the cards fill some of those cards with the 4K footage and everything, and like the bit rate
That's
that we're
so
doing
fast. Yeah.
is like you're filling a card every day. So then we're just cycling, like basically, yeah, as much as you're videoing them, you're putting them onto a laptop, onto 2 hard drives, and then recycling those around. So we've just had previous issues with where you thought you backed something up and didn't, or you thought, oh, I've got that card safe, and then that card gets lost or damaged, and you lose like 5 days worth of a Chital trip. Which fortunately, it's a Chital trip, not like a America trip,
Elk. Yeah, yeah.
lifetime sort of trip.
Yeah.
But the more we've got into it, and the more sort of regimented we've got with it all, we've just saved on that heartbreak, which has been good. So
Definitely.
there's definitely a lot that goes into it. So
Yeah, far out. So that's kind of so you said the fellow and then we're going on to the elk, like the vlog
yeah,
style
yep.
stuff.
And then
Um yeah,
from there, we've got a couple of bow hunting buffalo trips. We just did a bang tang hunt. James and I did a bang tang hunt end of September. And as part of that trip, as a bit of like a carryover, we ended up getting onto some really good boars as well in that trip. So that will be like a
awesome.
4 or 5
Another
part
one. Yeah.
video. Some of that footage is like honestly insane, like probably next level to that America stuff, purely because where we were hunting was just so untouched and remote. Like we had
Mm,
wild dogs or dingoes coming into like 5 meters and not really knowing what a human was, and like growling at
that's
you in the
insane.
camera and stuff. And just like the bang tang hunting was insane. Like they're just such cool animals, and to be able to like film them and like I guess like hunt these animals that are were new to us. We recorded everything. I think we were trying to
Yeah,
like, record a lot of it for ourselves. So there should be so much like B-roll and stuff that will make it some really nice films, which would be good. So
that's awesome.
but now try and like get through it all. And I think because we'll be doing it full time, the actual lag behind when we film stuff and get rid of stuff or chuck it on the YouTube is going to be a lot shorter, which will be good. And then we've obviously got hunts planned for next year, so we'll constantly be in a bit of a flow, which is a bit more fun. So
Definitely, yeah. I mean, there's so much there that I'd love to touch on, but that's going to have to be another episode.
yeah,
Where, it's just exciting to see what's going on. I think, yeah, once again, hats off to you both. Like, it's awesome that you're actually just you started this when you were so young and you were so interested in it, became such a big passion, and you followed it. Like, so many people give up on that stuff when they get to real life and work, and it's yeah, everything becomes a lot harder when you've got mouths to feed and full-time work to fill and all of those elements. But to see that you guys have stuck at it and just made it, like, I mean, even the last Twin Elements, essentially, you started that 4 years ago, I think, five
yeah. I'd
maybe.
say probably 2019, 2020. It was like sort of that period where it was just before COVID, I believe, and
Mhm.
I guess like I think the reason we sort of have made it as such is just because it's so authentic for James and I. Like in terms of
Definitely.
we live and breathe it. Like our whenever James calls me or I call him, it's not about oh hey how's work going. It's like
It's
hey mate
still
I thought
country.
about let's do this hunt or
Yeah.
oh you didn't believe what I saw. I saw a buffalo driving through this to go and do that work or whatever.
Yeah.
Like that's what links us as a family, especially extending to like dad and mum and
Hmm.
dad like as well. Is like we basically with dad, I've seen dad a couple of times this year, and it's all been for hunting trips.
Yeah, it's awesome.
That's how we connect and catch up, and then we obviously talk about life and share these moments and memories and stuff. But it's it's not for like a nice trip to Bali where we go and have a few beers and stuff. Like all of our relationships and catching up is through hunting. So I guess it's just always been at the core of like what we do as a family, which has made it, at the forefront of our lives as well. Um,
Which is also awesome, right? Because the connections you make through hunting, that camaraderie and fellowship and stuff, it's so powerful. And so it just, yeah, I'm sure the family bond is just so strong in general.
for sure, yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you say like the camaraderie and bow hunting. It's like I feel like you're one of my good mates that I can go and have a beer with, and we've
Definitely.
never actually met in person. Like
Yeah, a hundred
it's one
percent.
of those things that like it's just you have a few conversations with people, you talk on social media and stuff, and it's like, yeah, I
Hmm.
know that.
Yeah, no,
It's
yeah, I get that feeling
cool in that
100%.
sense.
There's so many people within Australia. I mean, even in New Zealand that I talk to, that I'm like, heck, yeah, I could literally go for a hunt with them or hang out for a beer and just have like the best weekend. You know it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, so cool. Well, we should probably get started on the Chital stuff in general then. um, we've got some internet issues happening a little bit, but hopefully we can get through that. So Chital Deer 101, essentially, we wanted to talk
There's
about the
lots
rut.
of great, yeah. Yeah.
Give it a second for the internet to catch.
I'm not sure if my internet's lagging.
Mine's still the same. I think we're back on.
Have you got me there?
Yeah, I do. You got me?
Cool. Yep.
Awesome. All right.
Yeah,
So
gotcha.
Chital Deer. So we'll kind of try and discuss how to best approach this because in a sense, they're a very different deer. It's kind of, I guess, a bit more like the Rusa in the sense of the rut can drag out and be a little bit longer than what you can see through something like the fallow or the reds. And so I was kind of suggesting that we do week by week, given that January is kind of usually a bit of a hot month for them. But you were saying that it can actually extend all the way out to like March, April, really depending on seasons and whatever else is happening climate wise and rain wise and stuff like that, especially where you hunt up in northern Queensland. So I think maybe we're still going to go month by month and still talk to some of the regular stuff that you've seen throughout the months, and I guess talking to the rut in general. And if you see rutting, yeah, a rutting mob essentially, what you would do versus if you see them when they're just chilling. And also just some of the I guess cyclical natures that they do, the things that they follow, what they tend to do during that time. So we'll pull it all the way back. January 1st, you're going out for a hunt, or in January, early months, what are you looking for, and what are you trying to see to say like, okay, I've got some rutting stags on the block?
Yeah, so essentially, generally, Chital deer are pretty aggressive by nature. They're a very like pretty petite sort of looking deer, appearance wise. But then when you actually get to like witnessing them and understanding them a bit more, they, as far as fighting goes and like tree marking and rubbing and all that type of stuff, they're actually quite like, I guess the stags can have a lot of testosterone and
Mhm.
really let you know that they're there. So one of the early signs is definitely like rub trees.
So like territorial signs more than like running at you signs sort of stuff.
Yeah, and one of the other things with Chital is that they're very like habitual. So like there are
Mm.
certain places, like especially where I do the like spotted safari guiding, where I will drive to a spot in the dark, get out of the car, wait till daylight, have the wind in my face, obviously with like a client, and I'll look up, and if I'm not seeing fresh rubs like 150, 250 meters away from me where they are year round, like that, because they have like what I call rub lines. It won't
Mhm.
be like, I've hunted sambar deer quite extensively, and like for example, a stag might have a few trees that they often smash, and there'll be like a bit of a signpost on a
Yeah.
certain ridge at a like intercept point. Whereas Chital deer will honestly work like a creek edge or a topographical line or a waterside, like a water, like a lagoon, freshwater lagoon edge or a lake edge or something like that. And they'll, if they're in that area, they're there because, again, particularly like pertaining to the rut, with January, like a lot of it is to do with factors such as rainfall, which then coincides with grass growth, which then coincides again with the hinds getting an increased body condition score. Like, so they ideally need nutrition to then sustain themselves so that they're in a good physical point balance,
Hmm.
essentially. And then once they're at that level, they'll start cycling. And you often get that around like a couple of weeks to months after that first bit of rain. And for those that don't know, like up in North Queensland, particularly where I'm hunting, the wet season sort of build up begins in like November, December, most
Hmm.
years. It can go a bit further either way from that. And then by like December, January, you're starting to get a little bit of rain. January, there's definitely normally rain, and that normally carries through January, Feb, March, sort of sometimes into April. To be honest, the last probably 4 or 5 years, they've had pretty good rain up there where I'm actually doing a lot of my hunting around the basalt wall area up in
Hmm.
North Queensland. Um, so the rut has actually been sustained rather than like one short month, which it has been in other times that like other years. It's actually been from January through till March, April. We're seeing really good rutting activity. And again, I think that's just coinciding with the hinds aren't as dependent on that green grass for a month. And then if they get missed, they're still in a good body condition score. So they're cycling for a couple more times until they're serviced by the stags.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so essentially what I'm chasing is good short green pick
Hmm.
for the hinds. And then if the hinds are there, the stags are going to be there, and you're going to know the stags are there by those rub lines. That's if you're not physically seeing deer. But if I'm hunting an area sort of in that early part of the year, if I'm not seeing rubs, I'm sort of a little bit hesitant to go and do a big walk there. If I know
Mm.
that there's 10 to 15 other spots on my property that they habitually have always been at that certain time of year. And as soon as I find the rubs, I'm like, all right, they're around here somewhere.
It's so interesting in the sense of like the cycling of the hinds kind of happens more so off of the food. It makes a lot of sense, right? Like why would they why would they fall or allow themselves to fall pregnant if they weren't actually physically fit to be able to do so? Like it makes sense nature wise. But then the other element and something that I guess we haven't touched on yet is are the males always around the females, or are they kind of moving on and off like other deer do?
I would say there's always generally a male, like a, so again, it's seasonal. So the
Hmm.
peak of when you will have the most mature stags with the girls is probably in that rutting period. But
Mm.
then you can have really good times to hunt chital deer in June, July. And like that, those winter months when the grass is hayed off a little bit, a bit drier, most of the hinds have probably been serviced by a stag. And then some of those stags that have been rutting for a couple of months will then actually peel off and become sort of solitary.
Mm.
Um, so in that stage, it's actually really good, especially for like bow hunting or even rifle hunting, to target like lone stags that they're often like within a couple 100 meters of mobs of hinds, but they're just pushed out by like those younger, what were satellite stags that are now
Mm.
all boisterous, being like, yeah, I haven't really rutted that hard because I'm only young and sort of dumb. They seem to be with the hinds a bit more, and then the older lone stags sort of peel off a little bit.
Yeah.
But in saying that, Chital deer, again, I think it's because they come from like Southeast Asia and like India and Sri Lanka and like those sort of countries. They're not relying on day length, and like the seasons change, like those European breeds like fallow and reds, where they're getting like the shortened day length and a sort of a very reliable date as to when most of them will like come into season and have their
I never thought about that, like the fact of where they had originated from, of the whole concept in Europe. And if you've ever been there, you'll know exactly what it's like. Where in the summers you have ridiculously long days, like 4 hours of nighttime, and it's not even complete nighttime. Versus in the daytime, like sorry, in the winter, some of your daytime's like the opposite, 4 hours, 6 hours, something like that. Like it makes a lot of sense that you say it there now.
Yeah, so and that's where like vets come in handy as well, because you sort of acknowledge like what you're seeing there, and anecdotally you talk about with people when you're hunting, like for example, oh, the goats seem to be rutting like, at a certain period of time, but then you go, oh, okay, goats are like short day breeders, for example, and then you go, okay, that makes sense, because in winter you're getting the most shorter the frequency of shorter days increases, and then that's when they're most likely to have the majority. And this is talking in like a general rule, like majority,
Yeah.
always outliers. And then with chital deer, it just seems to be there's more outliers, because those it's almost like the so if you consider things as factors and you go day length for chital deer, there's not much weight to it, I don't believe.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because to be honest, um, in like those summer months when we get the wet season, it's like rainfall, fresh green grass. If anything, humidity and moisture are like increased, parameters, I guess, as to when they're breeding. But again, stepping it back, this is probably all like a bit. It's hard to sort of talk about as a linear thing, but if you imagine majority of the stags, if you look at chital deer in North Queensland as a calendar, majority of the stags are dropping their antlers in September, October,
Hmm.
um, regrowing them back as early velvet stages in November, essentially finishing their growth cycles December. Some will lag into January, but
Yeah.
most of those big stags are doing it in sort of, November, end of December, they're starting to rub out and strip. And that's all coinciding with when essentially like that best feed is on the ground as well.
Hmm.
But also that deer are pretty smart. They'll find feed when there's no feed, like for the cattle,
Definitely.
for
Yeah.
example. Like they can go out onto those water edges where the farmers have fenced it off for cattle, and they'll get there. They'll browse, they'll forage, they'll do whatever they need to. And those bachelor stags, you'll find them all together in a mob of
Hmm.
varying sizes, and they're all fat as mud when everything else looks dry. So they do pretty well, but they're coinciding with their hard antlers with when that rain's going to come in, when the green grass is going to then come in, and then the hinds are going to cycle.
Did you say they're coinciding? That mean that they're already in hard antler by the time that the grass is there?
Essentially, yeah, yeah. I think it seems like the trend for most of those stags are starting to strip and rub out their antlers as that grass starts coming in, and
If
as the hinds sort of come in, because a lot of those hinds will be quite spread out as the
Mhm.
grass is drier, shorter. There's not much feed everywhere. They
Yeah.
might be concentrated on water, but then they'll often be feeding in little smaller mobs everywhere. And this again is just more relevant to like where I've hunted
Yeah,
and
definitely. But I guess in if you look at it as like a evolution type thing, essentially they'd just be getting themselves as ready as possible to be able to eat as much food as possible before they have to then go and fight for women, right?
yeah, essentially, yep, yep. And then they're coinciding. There's no point being in velvet when majority of the hinds are gonna be in season, because you're not going to fight with all the hard antler stags. So
Hmm.
I think because and chital deer, I've heard this said a lot, and I remember thinking, oh, that can't be right. But I've had plenty of clients shoot deer with fresh out of velvet, like in that early period where they've got all the marbling on their antlers and barely rubbed, like they've literally just rubbed their velvet, and you still find shreds of velvet in amongst the marbled antler.
Yeah.
And then I've had clients shoot chital deer where it seems like they've held onto their antlers for 18 months. They're just so
Hmm.
worn down, polished, like, a piece of ivory or something that you'd put on like a display or a
Is
unit.
that something that they can do? Is holding them for longer?
And I actually don't know like if there's any scientific backing behind that, but
Yeah.
anecdotally, it's like I've seen certain stags that, again, because we've got pretty like where I'm on a massive property that's over 70,000 acres, but when I'm hunting it and guiding there flat out, it's almost like I've got a booklet that I can show clients of, oh, this is this
Definitely.
tag 6 months ago, and this is him last week, and this is, and follow that through for 3 years or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, and go, oh, I haven't seen him drop his antlers yet. And then I look back and I'm like, oh, it's been 15 months. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Wow. Yeah.
So
It's so
having
interesting.
that luxury of knowing particular stags by not necessarily name, but knowing exactly who that is based on their antler characteristics, and like to the point where you'll know, like, oh, that stag with the big tines, yeah, he's got a rip in his left ear, and like
Mm.
you can track him for 3 or 4 years until he either gets shot as a mature, like 6-year-old stag or something like that, or they honestly, some of them will vanish and you'll never find them again. So just because they're covering such big areas of ground, like
Definitely. Yeah.
I've again had one client, we on day one of the hunt saw a stag. He ended up passing him up, and he ended up shooting him on day 3 of the 4-day trip, 8 kilometers away. So
Far out.
no pressure, nothing. It was just he was obviously traveling, moving around. So
What sort of time of year was that? Do you remember?
I think that was January. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Far out.
but it hadn't rained. It hadn't rained yet.
Okay.
It was actually again like he was coming out for like a rut hunt, and we were hunting essentially like late velvet stags that were rubbing out looking for girls, but the girls weren't cycling. There wasn't any like pull for all those girls to be, because it's quite interesting too. Sorry, we're jumping around a lot, but there's just
No,
so
it's
much.
fine. It's good. It's fascinating.
But up there in like North Queensland, I was just talking to the property owner again today because I'm booking in hunts at the moment. But like they had some properties up there in the last like week have had 300 mils of rain, which is like
Jesus.
inches and inches of rain, and
Yeah.
then other properties next door have had none. So if you can
So
imagine these
bizarre.
massive bands of like gale force winds and rain come through in these sort of summer storms, there's a chance that there might be, yeah, and a couple of inches of rain hit one little corner of a property or one paddock or one lake edge or one tree line or something like that. Even if it's not inches of rain and 10 to 15 mils of rain, like that can really spark up green growth, especially when
Hmm.
you've got all these dormant seeds like waiting there. Um, and especially if that paddock doesn't have cattle in it, the second that rain hits and then certain like cultures of grass and vegetation grow, the deer just go, yep. And 100 deer that have been spread out in little mobs of five mobs of 20 hinds with the odd little satellite stag over the last like few weeks will merge and almost form this, like, it's almost like a bait ball with fishing when you get
Yeah.
all those
Yeah.
fish going to a certain spot for a certain reason, and obviously they're getting pressured by predators, but in this case it's like this bait ball of chital deer are going to this one little strip of grass in a certain area for whatever reason.
Yeah.
um, and through experience, like there's certain paddocks that, and when I say paddocks, it's the cattle properties that we hunt on up there. And the deer can move through as they like through those cattle fences. They either just jump it, go under it, or go through it. But yeah, 100 deer will move from the surrounding areas and be concentrated on a little 1 kilometer by 3 kilometer strip of tea tree where the grass is grown to like probably a 5 to 10 inch height. And that's
Hmm.
just where the hinds are smashing it for the next month or two. And as soon as that resource is depleted, they'll piss off. And then subsequently, 50 stags that are with them will all piss off. And you know
Yeah.
that
Okay.
they're there purely from, you could glass that strip or that area and go, yep, there's a shitload of rubs on the edge of it. Like there's going to be, and before I even like get out of the car, for example, I can be like, yeah, we're on today.
Yeah. Wow.
And say that to, like, obviously, like if a wild dog goes through or your wind's terrible, like you obviously know there's things that are going to stuff up that hunt, but like that's like the confidence interval I have. Whereas if I get out of that car at dark and look up as soon as the sun's filtering through and there's no rubs, I'm like, okay, the rain hasn't hit here like I thought it was had, and it's not like it was last year. I've got to replan and move and work out one, where those rubs are, and then two, once I start seeing rubs, is going, okay, what are they eating here and this and that. So there's like a
Mm.
heap of different factors.
Different.
Obviously
It's nice
seeing
to see
deer,
the way you process it too, though, right? Like,
yeah,
if
yeah.
not this, then that. Yeah.
And that's like the luxury of having like 10s to 15 years of experience on that
Hmm.
property, and properties in that area is immense, because you sort of know what you're looking for. Because if A, B, C, D isn't working and everything you're throwing at the wall isn't sticking, you kind of go, okay, like what do I fall back on? And you go, all right, well, it's dry. Most of the hinds haven't been in a great body condition score because it has been dry for the last few months and it's just rained. Where do they want to be? Like, and again, where do they want to be? They want to be on that fresh green pick. So I'll start asking the property owners questions like, where are they not cattle?
Mm.
Where is it too boggy for you to drive around? Where's this? And like they're not going to obviously be in the mud and the shit. Like they'll often in the basalt there, they'll often, some of those spots that if it's too wet, if they have too much rain, they'll be up on the ridges where they get this really fluorescent green growth up on those rocky ridges that are quite fertile as well, because a lot
Yeah.
of like soil. Um, but they'll be up there and then they literally eat bed, eat bed, eat bed. Then they might be living on one little basalt ridge that's 200 meters like
That's insane.
in diameter or something. So there's just so many factors that I guess play into it.
Yeah, it's
But
like I was telling you just before we started the podcast that someone sent me some photos of some in Toowoomba. So if you look at it
yeah,
topographically on this map of where they are, there's literally like every 200 meters is a house or a shed and stuff, and there's just like 40 deer that are living up on this one hill, and they just sit there all day and just do exactly that: eat, bed, eat, bed, eat, bed. It's crazy.
yeah, and they're so happy doing that. Like up in North Queensland, their main threats predation wise, like aside from obviously humans, which isn't super high to be honest on
Hmm.
most places. Like most of the time, people, they're cattle farmers. They don't really have much to do with the deer.
Yeah.
Obviously, getting hunted a little bit on quite a lot of places that either have guides there or people shooting them for like meat for chiller boxes and things. But again, during the day, they're pretty relaxed. Like you see them go about their normal business, and they've definitely become like habituated with being around the houses, close to people, close to machinery, all that type of stuff. Just because it seems, and again, anecdotally, that the wild dogs that
Right.
there dingoes
Yeah.
get hammered by people. Like if they see a wild dog or dingo, they're shooting it because it's preying on their calves, like they perceive it as
Hmm.
calf killer. Whereas, so I honestly think because of that, the deer have this luxury of like an orbit around houses and sort of areas like that where they're essentially pretty safe.
That was
Uh,
like an aha moment for me because I've heard of it so much of like Chital and Roosa that they just tend to hang around the homesteads lots. And that's like
also,
oh, of course.
yeah, I think also like in addition to that, most houses, I don't know, it seemed to be, it's like most cities in Australia and the world seem to be based around a bay or a port or a
Yeah, good
harbour or
area.
something like
Yeah.
that. And most places up in the Northern Territory or like North Queensland are based like the homesteads near a lake or a creek
Hmm.
or a some sort of water source for
Yeah.
irrigation. So that seems to be the thing as well. So then if you're thinking they're not getting preyed upon, they've got often they've got water troughs and things like that, some source of water. The last thing they need is food. And to be honest, like a lot of places don't have cattle always straight around the house, or they're irrigating like lawns and things like that. And deer will
Come
smash
and
a
eat it from
lawn
yeah.
or a
Yeah,
rose bush.
exactly.
So they're sort of getting the best of like both worlds there.
Yeah, that's when the farmer's wife says you can shoot them now.
Yes,
The roses.
bring
That's
in
the crossing line. Yeah.
yeah, honestly.
Um, yeah, it's so interesting. So I guess but oh actually that was something I was going to ask is rub trees. Is there a specific tree you see they tend to rub quite a lot, like the reds in particular, they smash the saplings or they smash like the almost like paper bark style gum trees and stuff like that. They love it because it can rub easily
Yeah.
versus like yeah, is there something that you're seeing they're doing much of up there with the chittle?
Yeah, so up there it's quite noticeable. We have like the big poplar gums, which are those big white sort of gum trees.
Hmm.
And they're the ones that like historically like you can look at and go, oh, there's chital deer on this property, because you'll drive past like a station going 100 k's an hour on a road and look out to your left and just see 100 meters away this essentially white tree that's like got a nice green top foliage, white bark, white bark. And then
Orange.
depending on the freshness of the rub, it turns into an hourglass shape. Like orange, green, or slightly like drying off to like a browny red.
Yeah.
But yeah, if that's orange, you're like, all right, there's chital deer there and they're smashing it pretty hard. That's where like that's sort of if I'm assessing properties, I'm looking at like where those are, because often the poplar gums anyway are along creeks and things like that. And there are some sections of some of these creeks might flow for 70 kilometers through a property once you add in, 70,000 acres or whatnot.
Yeah.
And there might be 50 kilometers of that where there's not a single rub on it, or the rubs are spread out every kilometer on a poplar gum. Whereas once you hit that spot where there's on every second poplar gum, there's a rub and they're etched into the tree, that's where I'm going, okay, what's near this? And then you look on your maps and there's actually like a little offset billabong that runs to the north or something. And then off that, there's all this good basalt country and maybe a little spring that trickles into something else. And you're like, all right, that's where they're living. And then the stags, once they've lived there with the hinds and rutted and whatnot, they're using that creek as a corridor to get to the next station, where I often joke to people when they say like, all right, I want to hunt here in North Queensland. Like, where do I start? I'm like, all right, have a coffee in the morning at the house, talk to the property owner. And then as you're talking to him, get your binoculars out and start looking. Cause like, that's where the deer are. They're honestly around the houses. And then from there, most of the houses have a creek. I would start there and walk obviously with the wind in your face or whatnot. And obviously listen to the property owners. And if they say like, oh yeah, there's deer at this area, but they're in spots that they follow like those topographical lines, which often coincide with creeks or some sort of a gully, which carries water and then subsequent feed.
Yeah.
And often those creeks flow into a lagoon. So you might have a lagoon at point A, and then 10 kilometers away, there's another lagoon. You can just go from lagoon to lagoon, or you can follow like that creek and find there might be a little patch of water or something on that creek that's also holding deer in the middle of those two places. So like,
Yeah.
you can really fast track where you think they're going to be. And there are obviously years where like, so it actually gets quite difficult to hunt after the rut up here in North Queensland. So after that period of sort of particular growth where everything's short and green and you can sort of see the deer quite easily, once it gets to sort of like that April, May, June period where the grass is probably like knee high to waist high, starts seeding off and becoming a bit drier, because there's grass by that stage, like most places have had some form of rainfall. The deer will definitely still try and target the shorter green pick because it's just easier, more palatable for them to eat.
Yeah.
But once that sort of like wall of vegetation and grass comes up, it actually makes it really hard to hunt them, just because you can imagine a chital deer walks into that stuff and disappears. Like there are times where you'll have a stag standing and you're like, oh yeah, I can see antlers in the grass. And then by the time you get over there, like a couple hundred meters, you're like, he was standing up. Like once he's bedded, you're not even going to see
gone.
him.
Yeah.
And no chance you're seeing the hinds just because they're a lot smaller. So
Size wise, are they quite comparable to like a fallow?
yeah, they're pretty similar. It varies. Like I'd probably say that on average, they're probably slightly smaller, but then some of the stags that we've shot recently over like the last few years, there was one stag we shot last year, and he was massive. He ended up going 30 inches in length. That I thought on the hoof he was only like 27 because
He was
his
so
body,
big.
neck, and everything was just. It was he. We shot him, and I had two hunters with me that were both like big boys, like 6'3", sort of well over 100 kilos. And like if they had a laid next to him, this stag was probably like easily 110 kilos, which is
wow.
massive. I'd say an average Chital stag would probably be around that 80 kilo mark.
Far out. That's crazy. It's funny when I go and hunt fallow, like after I've been hunting reds in particular, I'm like, is that a goat? I'm like, no, it's a fallow deer. Like, holy hell. They're just so small in comparison.
Getting that scaling is always interesting. And like there are tips for that with like their ear lengths and things like that as well in assessing antler length. So they're things like once you sort of go, oh, okay, there's stags and you're familiar with like seeing stags, you obviously want to start sort of go, okay, is it mature? Is it not? Is it a younger stag, older, whatnot? You can often then, if you want to get into the detail of like trying to measure antler length, like that's obviously with the guiding something that I have to factor in for a lot of the clients. You want to know like how long roughly something is, and it's always an estimate. But you can use like head length in general,
Yep.
or ear length I find to be quite accurate.
So you'll go ear length and then say like, okay, well that's 4 antlers is the ear
Yeah, so
length. Is that
ideally you
what
want
is?
5 or 6 ear lengths.
Okay. Yep.
'Cause the ears are generally about 5, some of them are 6 inches. So um, that gets you to around that mid to high 20s most of the time if you're around that 5, 6 ear lengths. So
Mhm.
um, and sometimes like you don't even have to look, you just go, that's massive. But it is interesting once you shoot, because I've had the luxury of doing the guiding. Once you've shot, tens to hundreds of stag chital deer, um, seeing like you can really break it down, and it's obvious. It seems to me like there's different lineages of stags that have, or genetics that have been introduced to that like basalt wall region.
Yep.
Um, there are some deer with their skulls where they're like 13 inches long nearly
Hmm.
every single time, and they're a very like straight up upright sort of style. And then there's these stags with like smaller length skulls, but their antlers just seem to go out wider and stuff like that, and have bigger inners, smaller, like not smaller brows, but like comparatively compared to their inners, their brows are like proportional.
Yeah.
Whereas that previous one that I was saying, where their skull dimensions are like 13 inches in length from nose to like the back of the skull, they seem to be like that more V-shaped 10 inch brows and maybe 3 to 4 inch inners.
Hmm.
Um, and very, very like particular. And like honestly, I'll sometimes use that knowledge as to like that there's two different skull types, because sometimes you'll see a stag on the hoof, and sorry, I'm like jumping around, but
No,
like
it's good. Yeah.
those stags with the 13-inch skulls,
Mm.
roughly on average, seem to be a bigger physical, like statured animal,
Yeah.
a lot bigger. Whereas I can probably send you images if you want to like share it with the
Yeah, for
audience.
sure. Yeah.
It could be like, oh, and I could be like, how big do you think this chital stag is, or mature or whatnot? And people will be like, oh, he's not that big. But then because his body's so big, it makes his antlers look
Look
smaller.
small. Yeah. Wow.
And
Yep.
comparatively, there'll be something of the exact same length that looks 35 inches long, purely because his skull size is actually shorter. And then his body and attributes are more like, not feminine, like he's still definitely a stag, but they're just not as big of a deer. So it makes their
Mm.
antlers look giant.
Real big. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, there's like things like that that can really deceive you. And again, 90% of people that are hunting chital deer aren't going to care about that. Like it's just something that as a guide I've sort of picked up, and like, yeah, you think about now because you see a stag and you're like, holy shit, he's massive. And then you're like, all right, but give me a sec, let me assess his ears and this, because for someone that's coming on this trip, they are essentially trying to feel like, a once in a lifetime hunt potentially. Like, so
Definitely.
you just want to make sure that you're not reacting on, oh, it's massive, it's mature, it's old sort of thing, and going, oh, is it actually just like, you know, a nice young deer with a small body that makes his antlers look a bit bigger, and he's actually hasn't even hit his prime yet. So there's
Definitely.
plenty of things like to look into, I guess. But
Yeah, I mean, the only relative thing I can think of is hunting pigs and going from even like north to south of a state or something like that. You'll see just different body size pigs. Like some pigs are absolutely huge compared to others that you see. And like even as an example, the two boars that I've got, like Euro mounted behind me here, that
yeah,
one was
those are
from
so
Grant's
much
block. It
different.
was like he was huge in the sense
Yeah,
of like massive body, probably I don't know 90 kilo or so, and his head was just so heavy. Versus this one was at Liam's block, which is literally as the crow flies, not very far from there at all. And it was there was like a 40 kilo boar, and it was just so
yeah. I was
crazy
just
to see the difference. Yeah.
You can see that there, like that
Mm,
second board that you were saying is probably like at least a third smaller, skull dimensions wise, but the tusks are obviously impressive, and that's just maturity. But it's that clear a difference between those two different types of chital skulls that I was saying, and I don't
yeah,
think it's like, and it's not. I don't think it's like an individual variable as much as it is. I think it's two different genetic lines,
definitely. Yeah.
in the sense of, because their antlers seem to be like a narrower V shaped with bigger brows, or a wider, bigger inners, like sort of hourglass shape. So
Mhm.
it is like that clear cut black and white as to like, oh, okay, if you said, oh, this is the stag that we shot up in this region, and it's got big inners and an hourglass shape, I'd be like, oh, okay, I think its skull is going to be smaller than this one comparatively. And most
Come
people,
from Papa George's pool. Yeah.
yeah, literally, yeah, it's that definitive. But
Yeah.
um, I guess as far as like taking the potty somewhere, did you want to potentially talk about like hunting strategies, because I can talk about like all this background info heaps. It's just
Yeah, well, I mean, as a concept, I guess the next thing I was going to go into is like, okay, so we've found a location where we've seen lots of rubs. We know that there is potentially deer there. They're in rutting stages. What is kind of like the next steps? Is like, are they a deer you can call into you through hind calls? Can you rattle them? Is there anything that you can do to try, I guess, favor yourself more and pull them away from the herd, or is it pretty much all spot and stalk style hunting?
Um, essentially, mostly with chital deer, it's spot and stalk. I factor it in as my biggest rule with chital deer is be patient, even if
Hmm.
they're rutting and going crazy, and you're like, holy shit, he's broken off from the mob. I've got to get on him now. It's like I am super super conservative. Not conserve. It's hard to. It's hard to. I consider it very patient and conservative in my
Hmm.
approach and mannerisms, where I might stalk a chital stag for 8 hours and be at a certain distance from him for 8 hours. And then in 2 minutes, I've covered 100 meters and shot him dead
Yeah.
because that's what it needed in that very moment. But I've obviously done it a lot and got to the point where I can identify when that moment is. So that's probably like the biggest thing is because for the last 8 hours, I've probably been sitting there battling in my head, like, nah, the moment's now, the moment's now, the moment's now, the moment's now. And then because of a certain feeling that I get, I didn't act on it. And then you're like, okay, I'm glad I didn't, because he was peeling off and then he's turned around and he's gone back to
Mm.
the girls. And if I had have made that move to try and get around him, now I'd be in no man's land and in a way
Right in
worse
the open.
spot.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so the biggest thing I would say if you're going to hunt chital deer is be patient. And that coincides with ideally, yeah, if you've got deer in front of you, my biggest thing is like the best place to be with chital deer is in front of like or off deer, like looking, watching deer. Like
Yeah.
it's you work hard in a lot of instances to find the deer. Um, my biggest thing with the rut is that if you find hinds and you know there's rub trees around, especially if you're hearing like stags doing that bellowing, that calling sound
Hmm.
in the mornings, it's most active, and then obviously towards the afternoons when they're moving around again. That bellowing I've sort of attributed with stags announcing their presence, saying like I'm in the area, I'm looking around, like I'm rutting basically.
Mm.
Um, because you won't often get stags that are with hinds bellowing. They do more of like this growl to, because I don't want to. If you think of it with like fallow bucks and stuff and croaking, like a lot of that croaking is directed at like, and even with elk and the bugling, most bulls don't want to like, or bucks or whatever, stags don't want to announce like to their male counterparts like I'm here, but they're saying I've heard your calls, piss off,
Yeah.
essentially. And
Yeah.
they're telling the girls, I'm the man, stay here, stay with me, or come to me. Like they're calling the girls to their spot. So I don't think many of the chital stags, I've seen them obviously when there's like a big mob dynamic and there's multiple stags in there. You'll hear stags call, like go out the back and call and then come back to the girls.
Hmm.
But the stag that's often dominant with the girls in terms of chital deer isn't super vocal. They'll often growl and do this like, it's almost like a growling sort of wheezing noise that they'll do to the satellite stags to say like piss off, keep your distance, do not come within 20 meters of this in-season hind or this group or this bedding, like this tree where we're all bedded under. And you'll see
Yeah.
that the stags will be, it's similar to that bait ball thing where you'll have, and it's similar to, very similar to elk, having hunted with the elk and stuff, and probably fallow deer with like any rutting animal, where and frenzied sort of occurrence in nature, where you've got this like prime activity where you might have 20 hinds or 100 hinds and then there's a dominant stag in there.
Hmm.
You'll have all these subordinate males essentially circling the mob in an orbit, and if you can get close enough where you're not winding and scaring those satellites and getting them to flee out of like the periphery, and you're getting close enough to like, so say the mob's in the middle, the satellites are within 20 to 30 meters of that. If you can get to within 20 or 30 meters of that, that means you're 60 meters in like hypothesis from the stag, the mature,
Yeah. Dominant
um,
one.
yeah, dominant one. And it's interesting. It's like a lot of things. Sometimes I've got to tell clients like the biggest, the mature, most mature stag is with, most mature stag isn't always with the girls, but often they are.
Hmm.
And sometimes you'll have a stag that's with the 20 or 30 hinds or 50 hinds or whatever, and he might actually have a broken antler, but just be so much physically more dominant body size
Mm.
wise, like that 100 kilo chital stag opposed to the other 80 kilo ones. you might actually be targeting a satellite stag. He might be the 30-incher that's just hitting his prime, but still a little bit, like not quite primed physically,
Yeah.
and being bluffed by that older stag who's holding the girls. So it depends on like if you
What you're
want
actually
to,
chasing. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So your strategy might be to call that younger stag because he's going, oh, I don't want to fight the big dog in the middle with all the girls. Like, why would I do that if I can go and pick up that lone hind out here?
Yeah, got you.
But if you want to, similarly, if you want to try and shoot that mature stag in the middle of the girls, my strategy isn't going to be to call to him. My strategy is going to be approach silently, duck and weave through the satellites. Some of them will come in just advertently by getting pressured out by the big guy on the periphery of the mob.
Hmm.
Might win you, but they'll often win you. Most of them, if they win you, won't bark. They'll just piss off really
Just
fast.
go. Yeah.
Yeah, but because of the frenzy of what's going on in the middle and the stag and the girls moving around, some of the hinds might be like, oh, what the fuck's like Larry doing running away for no reason? They'll be a little bit on edge. But if you don't move, and again, that comes back to that whole patience thing, like do not
Definitely.
rush it. Like if you scare something, just wait, just sit there and wait. If birds are
Hmm.
calling, just sit there and wait. If you think a mob of cattle are going to come through, just sit there and wait. Like anything that you're like, oh, they might be, excuse me, slightly triggered, just wait. And
Yeah.
like again, with these rutting mobs, my strategy is to just be on the mob for as long as possible. And most of the time in North Queensland, the wind's pretty good because you're not
Hmm.
hunting these big gullies and mountain sides where things
Definitely.
are
The
painting.
swirls. Yeah.
Um, so once you've got the wind right, you're sort of playing this long game until eventually, like, yeah, that stag might lock up with another younger stag on the periphery, and then you've got two stags that are fighting there. And because you've been 30 meters off that satellite, you're now 30 meters from the big stag, which was always 60 meters away. So there's just so many factors with that. But
Definitely. So, in regards to the things I want to ask, hind calls, what do they kind of sound like, and is it something you can use regularly if there is a lone stag kind of out by himself or one of these satellite stags?
I will begin by saying they're definitely useful to have. It's very much like I've been on this stag for they're not my first go to.
Mm,
Calling animals in general, I probably, unless it's a fox or something,
yeah, prefer to be silent and
I find
unaware.
that yeah, it's because you're playing this dangerous game where with a fox, like they're hungry. Like essentially, you're saying to him, "Hey, I've got a free meal here."
Definitely. Yep.
And most people, even if I'm like full and someone goes, "Hey, do you want a snack? Like a piece of chocolate?" I'm gonna be like, "Yeah, I could probably fit in a bit of chocolate, especially if it's for free. Someone's giving it to me on a platter. Like, yep, no worries." Whereas I don't know, it sounds a bit funny, but like if you're maybe if you're single, it's different. But like if you I was gonna say,
Like,
but
where's he going with this?
yeah, I was like, it's hard to give an analogy, and I love analogies, but I'm like, realistically, with the calling, we'll put it this way, it's a lot more like diplomatic. Realistically, if you're calling to an animal, you're relying on them being extremally lustful, like for a
Hmm.
herbivore, essentially. Like they have to be that tuned on to like, yes, I am horny, I am receptive. I do
Yeah.
not want to, I either want to fight if you're rattling antlers and stuff, or I'm attracted to that aggression. Like, hell yeah, there's fighting over there. I'm attributing that to there are hinds in season. Let's go. I'm ready to brawl.
Yeah.
Or there's a hind call over there. I am not currently with girls, or I can't obtain these girls that I'm with. That could be an opportunity to find a lone hind. I'm going to take advantage of that. So that's what
Mm.
you're playing on.
So
Whereas
like lady luck a little bit.
but yeah, but there are definitely negatives because you don't know which mind frame they're in. And there could be,
Mm.
if I see a lone chital stag that I identify as like, holy shit, yep, it's hard because I was about to say, if I find a lone chital stag, I'm going to be much more likely to try and call him if
Yeah.
he's rubbing trees and stuff like that. But then the way I hunt personally, I know with my skill set and my understanding of chital deer and patience that if I find a lone chital stag and he's rubbing trees, I'm going to shoot him spot and stalk.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to risk that. Even if you said the odds were as good as 70% calling him in, 30% not calling him in, because then you've got to think about you might be able to call that stag in to bow range, but then he's coming in slightly alert, slightly
Hmm.
front on, most likely. He's looking for danger. You've got rather than potentially have all day to try and shoot him, he's going to walk in that quickly if he's receptive, and you've got
Definitely.
20 seconds to try and work out exactly what line he's coming in on. Is your wind going to get hit? This. Like, it's just like, if someone said to you, like, hey, mate, here's like a test that you need to get, if shooting the stag is like doing well in the test, you need to do well in this test. You have all day to sit there and think about the answers and submit it, or you have 10 minutes. You might be like, yeah, I've got all that information in my head because I was reading the book 5 minutes before I walked into the room. I'm going to just jot it all down. I'll be done in 10 minutes. But like most people, I don't know, I feel like myself anyway, the way I am, I'm going to rather jot that information down fairly quickly, assess all the pieces of information, but then I would actually like a bit of time to think about, like,
Definitely,
to
it's a bit more
calm
of a
down.
shoe-in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to calm down and be like, all right, yeah, he's rubbing that tree, but the time is actually 9:30 in the morning. He's probably going to bed down now. And then
Mm,
once he beds down as a lone stag, I haven't called to him because I recognize that, yeah, whilst I could call to him, he's probably going to come in with rattle bags or something, or hind call, because he's by himself and Chital deer are interactive, want to be with other deer. The fact that he's by himself, I'm going to play to that.
yeah.
But that's more in a lone stag situation, I guess. So it's a bit different to like if it's a rutting mob.
Hmm.
Again, if it's a rutting mob, it just depends, because like if you're within close range of like a satellite stag, they're the ones you're going to be more likely to call away from the mob. But you've got to think that only 30 to 50 meters behind that stag, there's a whole heap of hinds that might be receptive to a hind call, or
Yeah.
other stags, or so it's just, again, I genuinely, with Chital deer, patience being the biggest thing and playing it safe is the biggest thing. So if I think, oh, I could probably sneak in there right now and get that done, I then often go, okay, and if that doesn't work, what's going to be the result? And I, again, will
Yeah.
play it safe. And I find that by doing that enough times, you then go, oh no, this is the moment that I actually do that slight risky thing and take
Hmm.
five steps here because the wind's blowing a gale. Like, it's with chital hunting, it's kind of, I don't know. I don't actually know what it is, but it's a game of one percenters for me, and I try and stack them as much as I can. Uh,
Definitely.
And it's just, I think, because you don't have the risk of the wind. Like, I know in the mountains, like, I'm a lot quicker. I'm a lot more like reactive to, oh, he's gone over that lip. I've got to get to that edge and then peer over and try and shoot him because he could disappear into a gully. Like with Chital deer, it's like a chess match. You know, sort of what the board looks like. It's in front of you. Yeah, the chess pieces are moving a bit. Someone might add in another piece from off the board or whatever and put it somewhere. Like another stag might walk in. But as a general rule, the topography is pretty flat. The wind's pretty good, and like the deer, for me anyway, I know what they do a lot of the time and their characteristics. They're sort of like, I can perceive what they're doing, or like in a time wise what the mob is likely to do.
Yeah.
If And you can identify little things like, oh, that hind is the mature like matriarch, and you'll
Mm,
see every other hind will look to her for reassurance. And if she's the one that sits down and beds down, you're like, all right, cool, we don't have to go anywhere. This is where we're rutting for the day. Like, and she'll get up, they'll get up, some will walk 50 meters away and then turn back around to that best clump of like shaded trees or whatnot. And you, as long as you just slowly pick your way into that mob with the wind in your face, um, you could hunt
more
them all
opportunities.
day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hunt them all day. And like, I've had moments where you think, fuck, I left it too late, like that stag pissed off. And a big mature stag, for no apparent reason, will walk straight out of your life. And like, you'll watch him because it's hard again, because it's not like he's walking over a lip and you're like, oh, he's just there, he'll come back. You
Hmm.
literally watch him for 500 meters
Four,
walk
500 meters. Yeah.
away. Yeah. And you're like, oh, I can't see him anymore. Like, shit, I should have tried to get in on him a bit earlier. And you just sit there for an extra 20 minutes. You hear a stag call 500 meters away where he left. And you're like, oh, yeah, righto. And then 20 minutes later, he'll come back. You start seeing trees shaking from where he's rubbing them on his way back in. And he goes, I went and checked out where that other bedded mob is of deer, because that's what you forget with chital deer is there are generally so many, not
Mobs
so
about.
many of them, but they are a social animal. So he might have just gone and checked where he has a scrape, or where he knows there's another bedding tree, or he might have just gone for a piss and come back, like whatever. I don't know everything about chital deer,
Yeah.
but he,
Yeah.
for whatever reason, walked away, and then most of the time they do come back,
Yeah. Wow.
unless, and that's if there's been a stag on a group showing rutting activity. If I
Hmm.
find a lone stag and he walks up to, and I follow him, haven't called to him, and he hits a mob of like 10 hinds, walks through them, none of them are in season, and he keeps walking out of the back of it after like 15 minutes, I'm not going to sit on that mob of hinds all day, because he was there, he assessed it. If
You
if
kept
they were
walking on.
in season,
Yeah.
he would have stayed with them. The fact that he's gone, he knows there's something else going on.
Mm.
So that's where I'll keep my distance again, play the patience game, watch him hit those girls. I might be 200, 300 meters away because you physically can from the lay of the land. I'll sit there and go, okay, yep, he's in with the girls. If he stays around with the girls, I've got all day to stalk him. 10 Chital hinds in the stag isn't that many deer to work with, again, because I've got all day to get into 20 meters or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it's that bad. So I'd rather sit there than be like, oh shit, he's going to hit those 10 girls. Like I've got to shoot him now and then rush it. Because that's when those 10 girls will
They all
see
see
you
you.
coming,
Yeah.
and then they're looking your way. You often move too quick. The livestock will see you. They'll give off body cues. The deer run away. The birds will start calling because you're moving quicker and see you. Like it's just so layered, everything that's going on, and that you've got to be assessing.
Definitely.
So yeah, that's where I just urge people in the back of their mind to just one, calm down, lose the lustfulness of like, oh, there he is, I've got to shoot him now.
Hmm.
Because I actually get it quite a lot with the clients. We'll get them lined up on a stag, especially with the rifle clients, because we can shoot from a bit further away. And again, like for me, a far shot with the rifle is like 100 meters on these safaris. Like
Yeah.
I try to get people in close, have like an immersive experience, where they are within a good range, watch the stag, shoot him when he presents like a nice ethical shot.
Good shot. Yeah, that's
There's no
awesome.
rush to it, because I've just had, when I was a bit less experienced, like would get people into 100 meters, and then they must have felt the pressure of a guided hunt and a paid hunt, obviously. And then the deer presents the closest thing to like a broadside shot that they've experienced, but it's only been 20 seconds, and they feel like they've got to shoot it, and you're like,
Yeah.
and then they miss, and you're like, they were shooting a target at 200 meters and shooting like what we often shoot is the Bundaberg rum boxes and stuff, just because
Yeah.
that's what we've got. And they'll be shooting the polar bear's head at 200 meters and putting a couple of shots into it. So they're good shots. And then
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
it gets to the deer and real nerves and life situations, because they're like so lustful and sort of
Hmm.
got adrenaline, they miss a whole deer that's 80 kilos. Whereas once I say to them, relax, we've got a good shooting position. That deer is not going anywhere. He is there all day. Like you have all day to shoot him. Like sometimes sometimes with the rifles, people will honestly like not load a bullet, dry fire, and they'll be like, yep, okay, I'm ready to shoot him now, put an actual bullet in. And then once he turns and presents at 50 meters, they'll shoot him. And it's just so much different, that execution, when you don't feel rushed
Definitely.
to the, oh, I've got to like, and you see it like, I've got to shoot him like now,
Yeah.
he's gone out of my life. And I just, yeah, again,
It's so funny because I've felt that myself so much. Like getting into bow hunting, that was literally every stalk. I'm like, oh, now's the only opportunity. It's like once you actually understand and learn that for your thing, like for yourself, of like, even if this opportunity goes away, it doesn't matter because something else will come up. But right now, they don't know I'm here, so I can just chill and take my time. Like that is one of the hardest lessons to teach someone because it's an innate reaction to drop the the adrenaline dump that comes into your body, and so you just get that response of like, what the fuck? What am I meant to do? Yeah.
100%. And that's probably like one of the biggest things that you can't teach people. It's they've got to actually experience it themselves. And
Yep.
that whole slow is fast sort of thing, because
Hmm.
one of the best animals to actually learn this with, I would say, is feral pigs, because
Yep.
you can stalk a pig and be like, oh, they're so dumb, like, and take 2 or 3 quick steps and just do a tiny little. And pigs are pretty forgiving because their eyesight's not that good, so they might not see that movement of you taking too many quick steps, stalking towards them. But if they hear that tiny little stick break, like everyone's had it where the pig just like they stop feeding, they like slightly lift their head but not off the ground, so it looks like this, and they just like their ears will flick up and
Yeah.
they're doing that, and you're like, okay, and then they put it down and they start like chewing, and then you take a step again and they're like, all
Straight
right,
up.
something there, and then they do that like half circle to go away from you to get the wind right, and then they'll start like, and once they start doing that, you're speeding up to try and keep within like say
Uh-huh.
30 meters, and you're like, oh, so close to shooting it. In your head, you're like, I only need one more step. I only need one more step from the pig, and it's going to be broadside. But the second they take a step, you go, I want to take a step. They take a step, I want to take a step. And they start getting quicker and further away, and you go, oh, I've got to keep up with it. Instead of just being like, okay, where is that animal moving? It's going to that area. If I get out of its flight zone, essentially, let it walk away, like obviously to a point where you can see it,
Hmm.
Or like so chital deer, I wouldn't like if it's moving, I don't try
Just
and
stay
like
still.
with it. I
Yeah.
literally stop. And like
Yeah.
once it's either moved to a spot and settled down is when I'll start moving in on it again. Or once it's out of my eyesight, I'll use that as an opportunity to like sometimes I'll run a kilometer around a certain patch of trees. Not necessarily run, but like because there could be other
Big,
deer
big way.
or
Yeah.
but I'll like do a massive loop to come back around and essentially go, I started this hunt this morning at dark, not knowing what was in front of me. I know for a fact right now that there is a chital stag that I'm interested in this vicinity, and that's good enough for me.
Hmm.
I might not know where he is right now, but I know roughly, based on my intel from 20 minutes ago, that he is in this vicinity. I might never see him again, but I'll conduct that hunt appropriately and basically go, oh, there's some kangaroos in front of me at 200. Well, I'm not going to scare them because now I assume that they are in the flight zone of a chital deer stag that I want to shoot. And that's how I just
Mm,
play the day.
yeah.
There's no like, there's like a massive thing I think to saying like doing the easy thing is like not like the good thing. Like do it, like assume that if you do that and that goes badly, that's going to happen. Like is massive for chital deer because they just they pick up on everything.
Yeah, yeah. They're such a. I mean, they are the skittish, the most skittish deer that we have in here in Australia. I mean, are they the most skittish deer in the world or
Oh,
whitetail?
it's yeah. Again, I haven't hunted whitetail. I heard whitetail are very like they
Jumpy.
hear things and
Yeah.
yeah. And I think with chital deer, you just got to remember that they're coming from like yeah, India and Sri Lanka and like these sort of southeast.
Tigers. Yeah.
Yeah,
Tigers were
tigers.
their prey previously, right? So, I mean,
And
predators.
yeah, yeah. So they are super in tuned to like bird sounds because over there they have they have monkeys and birds and things in the trees
Hmm.
saying, "Hey, there's a tiger trying to eat your ass." Like get out of there. So they're in tune to it, and they haven't really lost that. I don't think too much. Like it's ingrained in them.
Definitely, yeah, like evolutionary, just stuck there. So one thing I wanted to touch on, you keep talking about a rutting mob. You're coming up on a rutting mob or a mob that's showing rutting signs. What are they outside of? Okay, we've at least seen rub trees around the place. We know that there's a male in with the females, and let's say you haven't heard any calls. What are the other signs? Like, is there going to be anything the hinds showing any sort of signs and symptoms, or is the males the you were talking about satellite mobs like often walking around them? Is there anything else that we can kind of look out for?
Yeah. So one of like probably the definitive thing that a hind is in season is one hind there might be 20 animals in that 20 hinds in that mob. One hind has the particular attention of a stag, generally like a mature stag between 25 and 30 inches, a big physically like mature animal.
Hmm.
That animal will often be like right on the tail end, like sniffing the hind essentially and like trying to court her, like posturing and things to her. They'll often
Hmm.
have their tail like up and erect,
Hmm.
be like really, really like as if you're flexing, like staunching their neck and head and like trying to they almost if it's just the stag and hind, he's like courting her. So she'll turn to the left, he'll go around to the left and like be like, nah, don't do that. And like trying to position her to breed her.
Yeah, okay.
So you'll see that. It's never normally that simple because there's normally five other stags between 20 and 25 inches, and then a whole range of spikers up to 20-inch stags orbiting that as well.
Hmm.
So you often have like a ring. You'll have that stag and hind surrounded by 20 other hinds in various, and that could be spread out over 50 meters, 10
Yeah.
meters, whatever, depending on generally the shade they're in. Because it's, and the other thing with rutting mobs is most of the chital deer like are pretty habitual with like, they'll feed, walk back to their bedding area, sit there, have a listen, look around, bed down. They'll often have their first bed at around, 8:39 in the morning. A
Hmm.
lot of those animals will get up about 40 minutes later and then they'll chew their cud like they're chewing their cud while they're sitting. They'll have another little brisk feed, and often by like 10:30, they'll sort of bed down in the best shade that's going to be more available throughout the day, essentially.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much standard. If you find a rutting mob and it's like 10 o'clock and there's still 80% of the animals are up, feeding, moving around, chasing each other, like you're in a rutting mob just because of
Yeah,
the
okay.
activity, essentially. But going back, one of the most definitive signs that a hind is in season is that she'll be doing like all this tail flaring and posturing and stuff like that. You'll see stags on her, and then they can often do what's called a Flehmen response. which is, I think, like the scientific part of it is called the vomeronasal like something response.
Yeah.
Essentially, they've got this organ in like their, I can't remember if it's the soft palate, like in the top of their mouth, or in their like sinuses, essentially, that detects pheromones.
Yeah.
And those stags will, you'll see it if you jump on spotted safaris. There's a few reels where the stags like basically curl their
Flip
lip
their lip up.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and cattle will do it, buffalo will do it, like all deer will do it. Like so many mammals do it, and they're
Mm.
detecting that she's in estrus through her urine. So they're essentially
Wow.
smelling the hormones that she's in season. If the stag is sitting there, and you'll often have it, the hind will tail flare, head stuff, urinate, and then the stag will go up to that spot, put his head to the ground, and then he like, it's almost like he reefs it up and goes like, oh, what's that smell? And like cringes and like grimaces his face. But then he'll sort of sit there and you'll see him go like from left to right and like lift their head and antlers up and sort of like smell it. And then they'll be like, oh shit, she is in season. And they'll
Yep.
go catch up to her wherever she is. And then from like those little cues, that's like a definitive sign that she's in estrus or coming
Mm-hmm.
on. That stag will then be very possessive over that hind. In the event that you've got like 10 hinds in season, which can happen, you'll have like a stag on a hind, knowing that there's 10 other hinds in season in that mob. So he's basically not on a hind. He's just running
It's
around,
going. Yeah. Yeah.
chasing, fighting other males. Like you'll have, of that inner circle, you'll have your 20 to 25-inch other good stags that are often mature, but for whatever reason, they're not on the hind. They might have been bashed yesterday by another stag in a fight. They
Yeah.
could have been a dominant stag yesterday. Because that's probably actually a good point, is that like that dominant stag position is so flimsy, fragile, like variable to the sense where like you, it's, the rut is really exciting because like I'll have stags patterned and go, yep, he's in this area, he's the dominant stag, blah blah blah. But he might get bashed or break his antler and be gone, or get an injury and he's no longer in that dynamic. He'll essentially then go and linger off, or sometimes you'll have like a dominant stag with broken antlers that is controlling the mob, but he's essentially got no like antlers to fight with anymore. It's just his body size
Far
is
out.
bigger. So
Yeah.
um it sort of all can vary quite greatly. But
It's
yeah,
so strange because usually, like a red or a fallow, they will hold dominance, right? The main dominant stag or buck will be the dominant one for majority of the rut, won't they?
yeah, it's almost, I don't know if it's because they bachelor together so like regimented that they almost like know how big his antlers are, and they've almost like pre-bluffed him a little bit, and then they go
Yeah.
pre-rut phase and they sort of obtain a scrape, and like generally a buck will have his scrape, and then the girls go to that scrape to get serviced, and then you might have bucks that are on scrapes by themselves going like, oh, there's no girls coming into me, I'll go check out XYZ scrape and see why, like if they're over there.
Hmm.
It's like having an open house, being like, yeah, come to my
Yeah.
party, and then no one comes. Eventually, you're gonna be like, all right, stuff this. I'm going to that party down the road where the music's pumping, sort of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that must be a bit of a factor more so with fallow, but with the chital, it really, because I think you're talking about such a great like number of hinds coming in season at the one time, or like at different times within a mob. Like as I said, there could be 100 hinds in some mobs, and then 20 of those cycling. Some about to come in season, others being serviced. Like you just get these rut frenzies.
Do you see it is kind of wavy like that in the sense like it isn't, there's not like, for instance, all the girls go into cycle at once. It's just usually that they will go in waves.
In waves generally, and like so that's where it depends, I think, quite a lot on that body condition score for them.
Mm.
So obviously, like for a hind to cycle and be prepared to have conception with like the stag and everything like that, they've got to be of a certain body condition score. And when I say that, it's basically like at the right nutritional level where their body's like prime essentially to have conception and then a fetus and whatnot.
Yeah.
Um, I think because similar to like other animals, I think their estrus cycle is like 21 days. So essentially,
Hmm.
they'll cycle, and then if they don't breed, they'll that egg that they release doesn't get serviced. That will disappear essentially. They'll then create new little follicles that form into releasing an egg, and that takes like 21 days
Yeah.
essentially. Um, Similar to like cattle and horses and things like that. Most of those larger mammals, sheep and whatnot, are around that. I think it's like 19 to 21, 22 days. So
Yeah.
if you understand that and go like, okay, the rains come in this year, and this depends largely on the rain and the seasons, but the rain has come, and this is speaking more for like chital deer, not fallow deer, because fallow deer, most people like, this is just throwing a number out there, a date out there, but most people go, okay, the peak fallow rut in Australia is April 14th. Within a week or two of that, you're probably going to get 90% of the hinds bred, whether you hear rutting activity or not. Like, sure, rainfall and all these things and green grass and hunting pressure and all these factors are going to like contribute to whether that happens and you physically, anecdotally see them rutting a heap. That depends on a lot of those factors. But without a doubt, in my opinion, most of the hinds are going to be bred unless they're not in a so unless you had like, this is where information from like America comes in handy with like their mule deer and deer and elk and stuff. Like, unless they had a super difficult winter where they had lots of calf death and then a really good spring, and then a lot of animals, got into really good body condition early or something and started cycling out of season, like something like that happens. It's a bit of a phenomenon due to like such
extreme weathers.
Yeah, exactly. Then that might throw out your rut a little bit, which has probably happened in the last year or two for fallow. Like, I think because there was so much of a dry period for a while and then really good seasons recently, it might have like changed things.
Transition a little bit.
I don't know the science or anything behind that, but
I think depending on where you were this year, like this year in particular is the year of the 6 that I've done the ruts where it was most inconsistent with the last 6 years and that was across the board, not just me, like what I was hearing from everyone.
I agree. I've heard that it was a lot later in parts, like deer rutting in like May as well, and hearing croaks in May, which is often quite unusual,
quite odd.
And that could just be that the hinds weren't ready to cycle for whatever reason in April, or they weren't bred in April, and then they've 21 days later now in May having
does that continue to affect the system? Like, will that continue to have a flow-on effect, or
potentially will? Yeah, because probably not long term, like in terms of like in 20 years from now, you'll probably go, the rut is going to be tightly confined to that April period, mid-April. But next, like, so if you're having a month, everything is going a month later, the calves are getting dropped a month later, those calves are weaning a bit later, the hinds or does, whatever species you're talking about, are going to come into body condition score to breed again a month later. So it might sort of carry on a little bit. But then with things like short day breeders, eventually some of those hinds might just not get pregnant that year as well, and then just reschedule to cycle again once that shortening of day starts. So it does vary a lot, because a lot of these, with going back to the chital deer, like a lot of them, you'll see the hinds that actually start cycling again are the ones with a little fawn at foot. So they've had a fawn and then it's been there for a couple of months. They've now got into their body condition score, but that hind is available to then conceive and have become pregnant again. But they're also still looking after like a little, 2 or 3 month old fawn or whatever. Like, I'd have to do the maths to when that comes in. But
I mean, that was another question I had: is do the fawns make much noise, and is that something you've ever trialed as well, like fawn calls? And I don't know if you heard the podcast I did with Joel Turner, but what his whole method was is essentially when you do fawn calls, the males know that it's at least a female that has gone through cycles before, so they're more likely to be able to impregnate them again if there's a mob of hinds around, for instance. So yeah, at least that's his method that he used on elk and that he used on red deer when he came out to New Zealand. He said it was really, really effective.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Some of the biggest sambar deer stags that I've seen, again, anecdotally, some of the biggest sambar deer stags have been with a calf, sambar calf, or fawn and doe or hind.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, again, I think once they have that fawn or calf, whatever, and then have a certain period of time, they come into like a heat again, that first heat, and that seems to just draw stags over. And again, that's what I was going to say about like some of those rutting mobs. It's so funny. Like, you'll sometimes rock up to a mob of like 80 hinds and be like, where are the stags at? And that there could be like a Congo line of 20 stags chasing one hind, and you'll see them like for kilometers, like running around chasing them. And like that line will start off like everyone's pretty close. They've all left the same point. But then you'll have like random, like I'll often follow sometimes a lone 2 or 3 little spiker to 10-inch stag to a 20-inch stag that are in a little trio running, and their tongues hanging out, their mouth is just like they're panting. And I'll just try and follow them if I'm not on deer, or if I'm checking out a new spot or whatever, and I find something like that, I'll just follow them, because then after a K, they'll often take you back to the mob. And then I'm like, oh, okay, cool, we're back here. And then like this mob of stags that are chasing one poor hind. And her thing is she's probably got a fawn dropped off at the mob, and
Mm-hmm.
she's always going to end up back there. So yeah, I think again, because it's like similar to cattle, to be honest. Like I've learned a lot with cattle and vet work and stuff, and like a lot of producers in, like, for example, in Australia or the Northern Territory are going off like 280 days, just say 281 days
Mm-hmm.
for gestation for a cow, which doesn't give you, if we've got 360 days in the year, it doesn't give you much room to get that cow
No.
having the calf, her uterus like involuting and recovering and stuff like that. She's obviously had the calf. She's now lactating, which is like one of the biggest metabolical demands in an animal, is to feed like a small infant, produce
Mm-hmm.
milk and eat and repair your body and stuff. So they're doing that, which is extremely demanding. So generally it takes like a month or two just for the cow to become into a position where she goes, yep, cool, like I'm feeling good again. I may even entertain the thought of having another calf, sort of thing. So it
Yeah.
generally takes 2 months in most, like some cows are super cows. They'll do it a bit earlier and be ready to cycle earlier. Others, it might take longer. They might have an infection. They might have, their body condition score might be really bad. That
Yeah.
calf might be a big calf that sucks the milk out of them, and they're losing condition still after giving birth. So
Mm.
there's all these factors, but you can think the exact same for deer.
But
So
yeah, exactly. It's going to
like
happen.
an
Yeah.
annual calendar, yeah. Um, with cows, like we obviously we try and stick to like annual, like it's pretty tough, really. Like they basically are pregnant for most of the year, have a calf, have 2 months to recover, and then if they're not like pregnant within probably 3 months of that, most cows are culled
Yeah. I think it's sold
for,
off or
for
shot,
poor,
right?
yeah, for poor
Yeah.
fertility. And the reason behind giving them like that 3 months with the bulls, and if they're not pregnant after that, is like every 21 days they should cycle. So if you
Mm.
give them 3 months, it's essentially 3 chances to fall pregnant again once they're at that perceived like good body condition. But
Yeah.
again, if they're not at a good body condition score, their uterus can be perfectly healed. They can be, physically ready to mate with the bulls and whatnot, or with the stags if you're the deer. But if their body condition's poor, their body's just not going to like be looking to mate. They're not
Exactly. Yeah.
in a mating mindset point of view, sort of thing. So
Yeah.
knowing that is kind of important too. So
Definitely.
then
Yeah.
you sort of get that variance in with chital deer, particularly when the rut actually occurs. And like I think that's
Their gestation is roughly 227 days as well for the Chital.
yeah, I can't remember. I think it's is it
That's what I just read, 227 days. So I
yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
I read before, I think Rusa were no, sorry, 250. And
I think it's a little bit shorter than the rooster and stuff, but I
yeah,
know the chital deer are longer than like sheep and goats.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah. Red deer 237. Sorry, 236.
yeah. So what's that? About 7 months roughly.
Yeah.
Yeah, which makes sense, because if you're getting them in January, March sort of period, that's either taking you to like the end of the year, or essentially like just before the end of the year.
So they're
Um,
actually very similar to Chital. Oh, sorry, to Fallow. Fallow 230. They say
yeah, which
Chital
would
2
make sense because they're
227.
that same
Definitely.
sort of body size and metabolic demands and things.
Definitely.
But yeah, so if you say, oh, something's breeding in January, then you're expecting a fawn in March. They might be the ones that then have the fawn, wean it, don't have a fawn with them at foot, but are in a better body condition score than something that gets bred in March. 7 months later, it's now October,
Mm,
has the fawn. The fawn's a month or two old, and then by January, when you're seeing this rainfall and stuff, they might not quite be ready. And again, they might breed in, like they might be there in making up that 100 animals, but they're not quite cycling.
yeah.
Um, but often with the chital deer, yeah, like a lot of them will have like a 2 or 3 month old fawn at foot when they're getting bred.
Yeah. Wow.
Because people look at it and go, "Oh, that fawn's tiny," but like a tiny chital fawn is ridiculously small. Like
Mm,
when they're freshly newborn, but like some of the ones that are a month, 2 months old, are actually
they've
pretty
grown quite a bit already.
big.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So in regards to like how long have you seen as a rutting period, let's say? Like what's the length? January through till April? Is that pretty fair to say?
yeah, normally, if you had have asked me probably 5 years ago, off previous knowledge, I would have said, because a lot of the knowledge from was in drier years, I would have said
Mhm.
January, Feb was the peak.
Yeah.
Whereas last year, March was probably the peak.
Yeah,
March,
wow.
March, and we were having rutting activity in April as well. Like,
Hmm.
which again, it's less likely, but it's just again, it depends on. We've had better rain throughout the year, and there's been almost like extended. Like, I think hinds rather than like, because there must be something to it where like there's obviously the peak, and then if they get pregnant and bred and stuff, they they have their fawn. Um, I've sort of lost track of my thought, but so if they are getting bred or don't, like if they're getting bred, have the calf, then that's all good. They'll probably stay in that sort of like regimented window of okay, next rut they should be in a good body condition score to have like that fawn again.
Hmm.
Whereas where people say like Chital Rut all year round is when like one or two or out of the mob, because you've got so many animals in like these mobs, aren't getting bred in the peak rut for whatever reason. They might have a uterine infection or poor body condition or just immature or whatnot, or just not bred.
Mm,
They might then 21 days cycle. If they're not bred, 21 days cycle, like
exactly. Can blow it
that
out pretty
period. And that's
quickly.
why they can sort of be like in June, July, like hinds that are in season and
Hmm.
all year round. Like there's nearly never a hunt where I'm not seeing a hind that's in season,
Yeah,
uh,
wow.
that's cycling, and you will often find stags on them. It's
Hmm.
just that, like, I'd say with certain like confidence that in that Feb March period is the peak
Yeah.
rut, and that's coinciding with like when there's the most grass on the ground and whatnot. It's also coinciding with when most of the stags have previous to that dropped their antlers,
Hmm.
regrown new sets of antler. They're physically like in really good condition because all they've been doing is eating in bachelor mobs, and then they're ready to rut. And then once they've rutted, they go through this period where they've lost probably 25% of their body weight. They now want to piss off and peel off by themselves and sort of just sit around, mope around a little bit, sort of be within the mob, but on the edges. Like there might be another stag that sort of missed the rut and he's going, oh, I'm ready to box everyone, but everyone's already been through 10 rounds. Like they don't want to fight. So
Yeah.
the young stag that's 25 inches is actually the dominant stag, but he's not the mature, stag you want to shoot. He's probably just on the periphery of that mob, I guess. So, and then it sort of gets to the stage where those stags that have lost 25% of their body weight on the periphery of the mob eventually go, yep, I'm going to cast, and they go and join up together on wherever the best feed is, generally somewhere nice, tucked away, quiet, where they'll put on condition. Like you'll find bachelor mobs sort of in that September, October period, where the same stags will be there. Like there'll be 5 stags, just say, and if you don't scare them, they will be there every day doing the exact same thing for 2-3 months.
Just standing up, eating, sitting
And
back down.
it's not like a big spot.
Yeah.
It's like one tiny little basalt knob if the feed's there, or they'll be walking to a trough and then you'll catch them walking the exact same way back, and then they'll feed in this little spot and they'll do it again tomorrow,
Yeah,
uh,
wow.
unless they're pressured. Like and it's often in this tiny little tucked away sort of basalt corner or like a little finger off a creek or something like that, and
Just an untouched haven, essentially.
yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, but it can be quite cool when you get like that rutting activity in like Jan, Feb, and then you've got like fresh stags that are losing, like stripping and coming in and joining the mob, and like stags that have been rutting for a month or two getting pushed out and broken, and it's cool to just get this like continual, as long as you're not scaring
Definitely.
like the
Yeah.
hinds as such. Um, that rutting activity can be pretty intense. That's the good thing about Chital is like it can be an intense rutting period for a month, 2-3 months. Like, whereas with the fallow, it's generally like you've almost got to time it to
14 days,
a
right?
week,
Like, yeah.
a week
Yeah.
or something. So,
Oh,
uh,
well, I can tell my wife that I'm going hunting for 6 months straight.
yeah,
I'm hitting the rut.
yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing we haven't really talked about is the fighting patterns and stuff that happens. Do the satellite bucks tend to fight a fair bit on each other, or is it always
Yeah.
that they're trying to attack on the dominants?
No, that dominant stag generally doesn't fight. You'll find that the big chital rarely fight because they go that hard that you often see them like near kill each other.
Yeah,
Um,
wow.
whereas the smaller stags, so if you've got two stags on the periphery, it's almost like they get frustrated and go, "Oh, righto, I'll fight you," and then they fight on the edge, and they're sort of the ones doing the clashing of antlers and mucking around and stuff. But then
And
they're
it's
not,
just kind of similar to like a fallow fight, like a head
yeah,
clash. Yeah.
yeah, they'll often you'll see them like do that same like they'll erect their tail like
Mhm.
posture up. I had a pretty cool experience this year when I was guiding in March. I had this one stag that like I just called him Grumpy because I've never seen it before, like facial expressions like a human. Like he was like growling and grimacing and like twisting his lip up and down and shit. And it was pretty cool to see. And he was like really like agitated. Like his eyebrows were like almost like a
Have
meme.
you got you've got a fair few photos of him, right?
Yeah, I've
On
got heaps.
yeah.
I'll send you a video so you can
On
like
I mean like on your actual on Twin Elements and Spotted Safaris. Have you been
yeah.
posting? Yeah, I've seen him definitely. I'm like, he just
He's
looks angry.
oh yeah, he's I love him. Like it was that's one of those experiences. We didn't end up shooting him
Yeah.
because he was like a satellite stag. He'll be really good in the next year or two. Like he was a mature stag, but we fortunately it was just we had a really good season and had
Hmm.
already taken a nice stag, and it was good to just watch like this mob interact and stuff, and these
Yeah.
stags like fighting and mucking around. But he was like a high 20-inch stag and just like yeah his facial expressions like with his eyebrows like inverted downwards towards his eyes and like his nose all scrunched up looked like he was just like upset with the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wanted to fight and
Poor victim. Yeah.
they sort of like will circle each other and not let like the other one get around to their back end, and then
Hmm.
eventually that circle like tightens and then they just like similar to a fallow will crank in there
Yeah.
and like fight and jostle and try and win territory and stuff. And often with the chital, their fights can go for a lot longer than the fallow and stuff because they're not like on uneven ground.
Yeah. Okay.
And they'll fight. Like I've had stalks on chital stags that have gone for like a minute where they're just fighting and knocking trees over and stuff. And you can stalk in for a minute on them, get to 20 meters and potentially shoot one or whatever your objective is sort of
Like
thing.
to the extent where you could run at that point in time, or you still wouldn't just
Essentially,
because of
you
the.
could. It's more when there are two stags like that in thick cover. It's really good. If they're in
Mm,
open country and you've got the hinds behind them,
there's no point. You'll scare
no
everyone.
point. Is
Yeah.
because you'll get the hinds stand up. If they've seen something, they'll often bark. Compared to if they win something, they'll often just run.
Hmm.
So as soon as that they bark, those stag will break
Just
up
stop.
and they'll just chase the mob. Even if they don't know you're there, they're just gone. So
Yeah.
it comes back to that like just wait patiently.
Situation. Yeah.
But
Exactly.
but yeah, they do, and they fight bloody hard, like really,
Mm.
really, really hard. But I've actually found dead chital deer. I've never found any other dead deer with like tines and things like holes in them. Whereas
Yep.
chital deer I've found, and it's quite common to find dead chital deer from fighting.
Where they've just stabbed
But
each
it
other to
always,
death.
literally, and it always seems
Yeah.
to be that like mid 20s sort of size where
Yep.
they just fight more because the big stags I think get to a point where they know what damage they can do, and
Mm.
they're sort of they're trying to react on bluffing, I think, purely because they're that much bigger than everything else.
Yeah.
Um, and you'll see like when it's really, really, really good hunting is when you've got like that 10 hinds that are in the mob cycling, and you've got probably two or three dominant stags in the mob that are giving each other like 5 to 10 meters of space, but they're
Hmm.
not fighting and they're not annoyed at each other because it's almost like, all right, Maddie, yep, you're like you're in your peak, I'm in my peak, we're good with each other, but let's not let these dickheads out here sort of
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
so it's almost like they go, yep, true.
Partner up a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, like you and I can sit here and fight all day, but then fucking that idiot over there who doesn't know what he's doing is going to take our
Step
girls.
in. Yeah.
You just chill out there. I'm going to chill out here, and they sort of almost have like a little truce, like this thing going on, and they'll sort of like get to edges where they're like, "Oh, Maddie, mate, you're getting a bit close. Like this is my girl, like because that girl, that hind, might walk over towards you, and you're like, oh, she's looking at me.
Yeah.
Got your girls that you should be worried about, sort of thing, and I'll be like, nah, Maddie, mate, she can walk over to you, but you know that
She's
she's mine.
mine. Yeah.
Then,
That's
like
hilarious.
all these little interactions and non-dialogues are happening, I guess, but
Hmm.
as like then you'll have like yeah that outer band and they're doing the rubbing trees, they're like smashing all the trees in front of you. um you'll have stags walk like straight up towards you and like what the hell has this stag seen something, and you didn't realize that 10 meters to your left there's a scrape, and he'll come and scrape in that, piss off, piss on it, rub a tree, muck around, and then walk straight back to the mob and not even
Scrape is in like a similar sort of setup to what the Bucks do.
literally, yeah, yep. They'll
Yeah,
a lot
wow.
of them are actually like combine scrape preach trees.
Mm.
Because Chital deer do it a lot with, and I don't think I actually answered your question fully earlier with the rub trees. So we've got those poplar gums, which are very
Yep.
noticeable, but then a lot of the like Melaleuca sort of tea tree, those paper barky ones,
Hmm.
they get smashed to like matchsticks essentially, because
Yeah,
again, like
wow.
they're soft and they're flexible and bendy and stuff, and they'll
Uh-huh.
just sit there and smash it, walk 5 steps, do it to the next one, walk 5 steps, do it to the next one, and you'll see like strips of. I'll have to get photos and stuff for you, but you'll see strips of 100 trees and like there's a line down the middle of it either side of a game trail that every tree is smashed.
Yeah, wow.
And then they also do it with like these little I call them like silver leaves, but they're more of like a, not like an acacia, but they're sort of like a wattle, I guess.
Hmm.
um and they've got like, they're a bit sort of a harder timber, almost like a cherry tree for the Victorian like sambar hunters. They're sort of like, they're like a dark timber, but they stain a bit red in the middle once they're
Mm.
rubbed. And again, like when they're in their sapling sort of stretchier phase, the Chital I think will like
Just
rub
bash
those.
them around
But
a bit. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, they're probably the most common that I can think of off the top of my head. But
So go back to the scrape then, because that's something we haven't really touched on. Is there a lot of is like obviously they're very territorial in the area and they'll stay in that one area. Is this, you said it's something that they share? They'll all go
yeah,
in on it?
they'll share it, and it's there. You'll see them. They preach. And for those that don't know, scraping is essentially, there'll be like generally a tree,
Hmm.
and under that tree or that area there will be a little, I don't know, meter by meter diameter impression in the ground that the deer are going and physically with their front legs digging up.
Yep.
I'll dig it up, and usually they'll urinate in that, and they're trying
Hmm.
to flick that dust and pheromone of their piss and urine and hormones and whatnot onto themselves, so that the deer, and you can smell it. It's like quite musky. Sometimes I'll walk through an area and be like, because we got the wind in our face, I'll turn to my clients and be like, I can smell a stag. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, that's, can you smell that? And they're like, no. I'm like, and then sure enough, 200 meters later, there's like stags, there's a mob there or something. Because they're often, when they're getting used and fresh, they're in those rub lines as
Hmm.
well. And they seem to be on that like sandier sort of soil up there where we're hunting. And they're
Yep.
often under like a big, like a Melaleuca tree that has a bit of like an umbrella top to it.
Hmm.
They like, what they like doing is pissing, doing the scrape, and then they'll look up, and anything with like, or those gums that have like a branch coming out almost horizontal and dropping down some
Dropping down
leaves
the end.
about
Yeah.
our head height, like that 6 foot height. They sort of will jump up into that, and they've got what's called a preorbital gland, which is just
Hmm.
like, means in front of the eye essentially. And this gland again is like a scent pheromone sort of organ. They can
All
put their
these.
scent on the trees or on the sapling, on the leaf, whatever they're trying to get up high to. Um, and again, essentially, like the bigger the stag, the higher up they're going to get. So that's their
Yeah. Okay.
marking, saying like, I'm the biggest stag, I'm in this area, and it's a competition essentially. They obviously will go there and they'll jump up, smell, oh yeah, Maddie's been here, blah blah blah's been here, yep, cool, but I'm still the top dog, and then they'll
Yeah.
keep going
Wow. Yeah.
and walk. And you'll see stags will go from rub tree to rub tree, and then like preach, go back to the hinds, like. So that's something that's just that scent marking part of their,
Mm.
I guess it's not necessarily ritual, but, and you'll see like a young stag will walk past, hit it and smell it and be like, oh shit, and then walk straight to the mob, like almost as if they've left a trail on the
Yeah.
ground in the vegetation as to where that, like they're very good at knowing where other deer are.
Yeah.
uh,
Okay. Yeah. It's
often
so interesting.
often with the stags and deer that are traveling, if you see them like wagging their tail, like almost like a puppy that's really excited,
They know.
they're sort of traveling towards other deer, is what I've concocted and found out through like, again, just doing it, watching enough. And
Yeah.
but you have to be careful. Like sometimes, like over the wet season, there'll be like buffalo fly and
Mm.
insects and
Yeah. Just
ectoparasites and stuff
shaking
that they're
stuff off.
annoyed with.
Yeah.
Yeah, they might be shaking it, but they definitely change their mannerisms when they're walking towards other deer, and like their ability to see like other deer. Like I think I've said it before, with a Chital stag will be completely relaxed with like his hinds and stuff embedded, and you'll just see him flick his head up and like look a certain way and like eyes fixed on it for like 10-20 seconds, and you're like, don't move, like what's going on? And then he'll put his head down and relax, and you look that way, and like 400 meters away there's a stag coming in. and he's
It's
just spotted
crazy.
that from being completely relaxed bedded.
Yeah.
Like their antlers when they
Just
move,
proves how good their eye, yeah,
yeah,
their
yeah.
ears are. Oh, sorry, their eyes are, yeah. And so on this the scrape front, did you say that they'll only usually kind of do like one within that mob, like within an area, or there'll be multiples that they
Or
will visit?
sometimes so you might have like one of these shady trees. Like there's what's called a quinine tree up there, which it's like a small, slender sort of tree with maybe like a 5 meter diameter um, shade area under it.
Hmm.
There might be like three scrapes, three preach trees, like one on each sort of corner of that shady area on that tree. But then a ridge or like a game trail might have a scrape, and then 50 meters down the down the game trail, another scrape, and then 50 meters away as they're traveling to like their bedding areas. But like it just depends. Probably it's probably more a condition of like it has to have the right soil or the right
Mm,
like substrate, sandy sort of substrate for them to be able to dig up because they're not going to do it on most ridges where it's like rocky and basalt country.
yeah, but you're
Um,
not paying as much attention to it as if it was like a fallow rub for
no,
it, like a
no,
fallow scrape. Yeah,
no, definitely not. To me, again, because it's not, it's hard. Like if I know it's the rut and there's a spot where there's always historically been good scrapes, rubs, preach trees,
you'll go back.
I'll walk that. But again, if I'm
Hmm.
not seeing those rubs active, I'm not going to be like,
We have to
oh
be here. Yeah,
yeah, like because you could walk a game. It'd be the essential, the way of saying it would be like, you know, you could walk a game trail and be like, oh, there's piss on the game trail, there's deer nearby, but you might have walked it for 20 Ks. Like
yeah.
it means little to me if there's like piss in a scrape, if there's no rubs around it, because it could have just been one young stag by himself has just walked through it and pissed on it,
Hmm.
like smelt it and gone, oh, there's nothing really here, kept going. Whereas if there's rubs everywhere around it, I might be more likely to sit by that scrape or something. But again, unless it's like early in the morning and you've got like a really low, like a really mature lone stag just moving between mobs, it's probably like I'm going to try and find those hinds essentially,
Mm,
find the rubs, and then where the rubs are, you've got that orbit of stags that are creating the rubs, but because the hinds are there. So essentially,
yeah.
during the rut, you want to pre go, okay, yep, it rained, there's grass there, which paddocks is there no grass in, or where have they been previously over the years? That's where I'm going to go and look for the hinds. You want to like you're hunting the hinds essentially because that's where the stag's going to be. But if you're
Yeah.
not seeing rubs, that's probably not where the hinds are because the stag's going to be rubbing the shit out of every tree around those hinds. If that
Hmm.
makes sense. Uh,
Definitely. Yeah,
yeah,
so I guess as a recap, essentially, um, looking for rub trees first within gullies or areas where you know they locate often, and if they're fresh inside, then looking for the girls, trying to
yeah,
stalk in close and get as close as possible, let's say 60 meters off of them, so you can kind of watch and see what's actually happening. If there's no stags there, still don't run off because there's the chance they could be coming in. And if a stag comes in and doesn't actually stay around and keeps going, that's actually a sign that you should potentially move on to another mob and follow where he's going instead. If
yeah,
there's lots of stags around that mob, there's a fair chance that there's actually going to be a bit more rutting action. You should probably stay around and hang around that mob for a fair while. I think I really like your concept of staying quiet more than kind of alerting them, just because they are such a skittish deer in general, and it's just like you're better to be unknown and rather than it being like, oh, where's that deer over there, and I'll keep checking back over there in case there's something there.
yeah.
Yeah, I think all in all, like there's a pretty good little concept of like, hey, this is the. I mean, you've given us so much insights. Is there anything else that you think that we should touch on?
I think that summary there is like perfect. That's pretty much like as I sort of think
The
it and see it.
30,000 foot view, yeah,
Yeah, but that's also like I guess I'm talking from a property where like we've got sole access, we've got
definitely, yeah,
a lot of country. Like it's very rare that like a deer is going to walk through the fence to the neighbors. So if I'm on a mob and I see like, or if I'm on a lone stag and I know that the deer moved from my place, which is 20 acres or 100 acres, and could be on that place next door, if I've got a lone stag on my place and I can't particularly get in and stalk him, but there's a chance he's about to walk through the neighbor's fence, I'll probably call to that stag. Do you know what I mean? Like this is talking about,
definitely, yeah,
or
and
even
that's all situation basis, right?
yeah. So that's where if you go like, oh shit, I do physically think that calling to him or whatever, it's just that you've got to be prepared that you might hind call and he'll hear it, flick his head, wag his tail, like, yep, there's another deer there, but I'm not interested because I'm on
We're doing so well.
up and change quite a lot.
It just cut out a little bit, but yeah, it was
Okay.
like we'd done the whole time and it hadn't cut out at all, and just right at the
would,
very end there.
would that audio have carried through, or
Nah, not your part. What did you say? So it's like pretty much situation. If he was about to disappear, then use your calls.
essentially, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and it's just playing it. So like if you've got, yeah, if you're sitting there going, okay, he's about to walk onto the neighbors, I have to try and turn him around, or essentially risk he could come back, but he might not. He might go on, the hinds might be on that block for
Hmm.
today, tomorrow, and the next week, and I've only got one day to hunt him because it's an after work mission.
Yeah.
That stag is in a position to call him, I would probably call.
Do it.
It's
Yeah,
just that you've got
100%.
to be realistic that he might actually be on something that you can't see, like a hind's pheromone trail through the grass or on a game trail. And you might call, he might hear it, be half receptive to like, oh yeah, the hind over there, but I'm on a hot hind scent here. I'm
Yeah.
going that way. But realistically, if you and like just don't overcall. Don't like
Don't think it's going to be
and
going to
I
save
don't
you. Yeah.
actually, I don't think we actually said like what we call with. So like, as far as rattling antlers go, you can literally with fallow antlers rattle. Like a
Hmm.
rattle is really good. I've often used rattle bags because like with chital deer, they see hand movement so much. So you don't want to be sitting there going like bang, 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 like clash, clash, clash.
Yeah. Yeah.
500 meters, those chital deer will see your hands moving. Like
That's
everything
crazy.
is
Yeah.
so particular. Whereas with the fallow, you've often got like terrain and
Hmm.
topography that are like blocking
On
it.
your
And
side. Yeah.
yeah, they're often coming in like hopefully from probably downhill up, like looking past you, like all those sort of factors. Whereas with chital deer, because you're flat, you're on their level. It's like, as I said earlier, you're hunting on this chessboard. You can see where everything is. They know what move you're making. You know what move you're making. Like if you're sitting there in the middle, just going clash, 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 clash. Yeah, it might sound awesome, but if they see something and they're not sure about it, they're not coming in. Like
No,
they're going to come
exactly.
another
Yeah.
way. So I've had where those like little rattle bags are really good, and you're just sitting there with your hands like in front of your body, so your body is like a backdrop, and you're literally
Hmm.
just going
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
and that will often work. And like ramping it up, like less is more, and then to the point where okay, he's interested. Like, yep, now I'm just gonna go like, and then that's it. And that hopefully that's enough for him to go like, yep, there's deer there. And as soon as they start turning and coming in, like they're normally pretty good.
Just be quiet from there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Same goes for the hind calls. So James and I have often used
The
like the
reeds.
hoochie mama calls and stuff. They did
Mm.
make like a cow estrus call and a calf call, similar to
Yep.
what I was saying earlier, and that's like a very high pitched like sort of
Hmm.
noise, similar to a fallow, really.
Yep.
Essentially, probably more high pitch, especially if you're going for that fawn variation. But yeah, the mouth diaphragm calls work
Hmm.
sweet as well.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
and that's just like it's hard. Like if someone was like, "Oh, hey, I want to try and call one in," probably just send me like a message or something, and we can send you a video or whatnot. I don't know how to do it. It's just because to be honest, it is going to be a lot of like trials and tribulations
Oh,
with it.
definitely.
Probably
Yeah.
call to like 100 deer and get 20 to come in, and
Yep.
even they might come in and pull up or like it's the way I hunt. I back like my skills stalking and reading
Hmm.
animal behavior and patience wise enough to be like yeah, I probably could get it done now, but I'm just going to wait until the odds are sort of stacked in my favor, and then I'm more assured to get it done. Essentially,
Yeah, definitely.
again, the way I hunt is like I wouldn't video with James, and I wouldn't video the hunts as much as we do and stuff if we didn't know that like takes an extreme amount of like sacrifice in terms of like
Hmm.
not always shooting something. Like we're not
Yeah.
like in the sense of oh we've got to kill this. If you want to go and like have a chance to shoot something every single time, it's like you probably wouldn't video your hunts. So
Filming.
that's
Yeah.
where like,
Filming's not going to be the best thing for you. Yeah.
yeah, that's where I think for us, fortunately, over the years, like through these experiences, we've worked out like a very regimented process
Mm.
as to how to hunt chital deer, which is
Systematic
now,
approach.
yeah, and it's systematic. It's sort of probably a bit boring for most people because it's like they're like, oh, let's go now, and it's like, nah, sorry, buddy, we're locked in for an hour. Like the situation is not right. But then you do all that patience, and then we see like, all right, now it's actually a green light. Let's go.
Opportunities to actually come. Yeah.
And then that stag or deer or whatever is dead
Yeah.
in minutes from then. It's just knowing like when that moment is to actually move.
Definitely.
And again, it's probably more Chital specific because you do that on a fallow buck, like he's gone, he's in thick bush,
Mhm.
you're not going to find him, the thermals aren't right, whatever factors. Like there's just different factors. Whereas for us, like again, back to that chessboard analogy, it's like I know where he is, I'm here. I've slowly got to edge my way through these these squares, get around his does, which are the pawns or whatever, and then eventually I'll have a chance to shoot him, to checkmate him or something. But it's not my move now isn't getting rid of my bishop or something, or putting my bishop up the other end of the board when there's so much other shit that can go wrong or whatever. Like
Definitely. I
it's
think I think that's why I really love this approach as well, like where we do get to do an animal specific podcast where we're really going deep on it. Because if I was to go and hunt chital without any of this information, I would be trying to do the calls, I'd be trying to rattle them in. I wouldn't know that the eyesight's as good as what it is. Like it's all these things that you would use from your tool bag, which is not relevant at all for this animal. So yeah, I think
and
it's really, really insightful.
and that's probably the last tip, which we didn't touch on a heap, but it's just like whenever I talk about chital, it's like patience, but glassing is if you're seeing the rubs, but you're not seeing the chital deer, it's probably because you're walking too fast.
Stop and glass. Yeah.
And that's like the biggest thing. If we go back to the very start of the podcast and say this is like glass lots, walk little. And it's like,
Hmm.
I'll get out of the car at first light and put my binders up and be like, yep, there's rubs. Let the boys know, whoever the clients know, we're in the right spot. We are literally like, jump in, get comfortable. Like we're taking a
We're
step,
sitting here. Yeah.
glass, 180-degree view, take a step, glassing. And the beauty of that is that the deer will often in the early morning walk onto you, or you'll see them, because just as you can see them, they can see you. And it's
Hmm.
honestly 500 meters away, sometimes more, depending on the feed or the cover or whatnot.
Yeah.
You'll also like hear like, so often when it's rutting time, any of my hunts, like I'll get there before dark, sit there in the car so my wind's not like spreading anywhere, because
Hmm.
sometimes you get out and you're like, you've got to a point where 500 meters away there's a mob of 100 chital deer that you don't know about, because they could be 500 meters away or 3 kilometers away or whatever, but they're probably in this spot based off like the previous history, the rubs that I've seen,
Exactly. Yeah.
whatever. But sometimes you get out of the car and you're like, oh fuck, they're right there. Like, but there are other times where they're not there, and you hear 5 stags calling 3 kilometers away in a direction you weren't going to go and hunt that morning. If I'm hearing 3 or 4 stags bellowing, I'm going that way, and I'm going to
Yeah.
try and pick up those lone stags that are calling, and then eventually they'll take me to a mob,
Mm,
because
yeah.
they're the ones that are often the calling ones, are often the ones that are traveling, and sometimes. And again, like it's one of those things where, oh, I heard him call. He should be just here in front of me, and he probably is. But the speed at which like a rutting, moving chital stag is going, it's like why I don't stalk them is why I stay off them at 300 meters and just glass them. I'll be like, oh yeah, I'll lasso his antlers and ass walking that way, and that's good enough for me. I'll
Yeah.
sit there for the next hour and slowly take 10 steps, glass, nothing there, 10 steps, glass. And then you get to a point where like you were actually walking too quick, and you glass somewhere that you've glassed 50 times. And you're like, holy shit, there's like 30 hinds in that stag on the edge of it. And there's now 20 other stags. And like, it's so
Popped
layered
out of
and pushed
nowhere.
up there,
Yeah.
all just like matchsticks of trees. And you're not looking at it as like, yeah, it's so weird. It's like it's all in
Yeah.
front of you. You've just got to slowly unveil it, I
I
guess.
got to hunt with James. It was early on, like maybe my second year of hunting, essentially. And just watching him, the way he approached my block, I'm like, no, I've never seen deer here. He's like, doesn't matter, we're glassing it. And like he'd take a few steps and then glass and take a few steps and glass. I was like, holy hell, like a very, very different approach to what I'd ever done previously.
It's hard to like, and whether that's right or wrong, I'd just rather like
No.
I love one nature and stuff. So like if
Hmm.
we don't see a deer and we have like cool encounter, then that's like a win for me or something, or just being out in the
Hmm.
bush is nice. But
Yeah.
if I do that walk and don't see deer, like eventually like a couple of times and I'm not seeing the sign, I'm like, yeah, we're gonna bust through this and then go and hunt and start hunting. And that's the luxury I have with the chital deer is like, again, I might walk a section of creek at a near jog for some people that quickly until I see rubs. And then I'm like, all right, we stop now. And now it's like we barely move
Very
for the
different hunt. Yeah.
next
Different
hours. So
approach.
it's definitely like a thing, but people are very quick to be like, oh, I didn't see any deer there. I didn't see any deer there. And I've had people come up and like go for a walk, by themselves, just like they shot a deer and they don't want to come with me and the other client hunting that day. So they'll go and like take photos. And they're like, I didn't see any deer. And I'm like, there were 100% deer there. You scared them. And like, there's times I'll turn to my client and be like, oh, there's deer. They've spotted us. They're running. And they're like, oh, where? And I'm like, up there. There's like 100 deer running. And they're like, I can't even see
Can't
them.
see him.
Like,
Yeah.
they're
It's so
not, the
bizarre.
scale of where they're looking is not the same. And like, yeah, it's people are very quick to be like, oh, the wind changed. It's like, nah, that deer's been like, I've watched that
Been there.
hind looking our
Exactly.
way not looking at us, but looking because that bird that's 100 meters in front of us is calling, which means that hind that's 400 meters in front of us is looking our direction and then has seen something enough to be like, no, I don't like it. I'm going.
It's
And you're only
crazy.
100 meters in front. You never see that deer at 400 run away, sort of thing.
So
So,
big lessons to slow the heck down. I'm sorry to do it, but I have to bounce because I've
oh,
got
good.
another call in 5 minutes. I really thought like I was like, yeah, we've got so much time, but I always misjudge it. But
All
I
good.
think there's been some really cool insights, and I really do appreciate your time for this. And I think yeah, like Aiden said, reach out to him if you've got specific questions around the calls and stuff. Maybe if you want to even send me a video and I can post it as part of the podcast advertising and stuff. But Ayden Doumtsis Outdoors is your main page. You've got Spotted Safaris. Is it straight?
Yep.
It's just Spotted Safaris, right? And then
Yeah, that's
Twin
right.
Elements as well, just
Yep.
straight. That's the different tags. Jump onto the YouTube channel and make sure you're checking out Twin Elements stuff because the videos are absolutely incredible. And like you were saying at the start of the podcast, there's so much more to come, which is awesome.
Yep. Thank you, Matty. Appreciate it, mate. Always good. And
Thanks,
yeah,
bro. Likewise. Always good to chat.
thanks, mate.
All right. See you, man.